Good evening, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Crossman, Regional Psychiatrist of Southeast Regional Health Authority and the current president of the Jamaica Psychiatric Association. Allow me to welcome you to this year's Child's Month webinar. And this webinar is in association with the Southeast Regional Health Authority Mental Health Services, and we have partnered with the Department of Sociology, Psychology, and the Social Work, University of the West Indies, Western Jamaica Campus, and the Jamaica Psychiatric Association. We want to start off in good graces, and so we want to invite Dr. Anthony Allen, who is going to allow God's blessings to be in our midst at this time. Dr. Allen, go ahead.
God, our Heavenly Father, we who seek to be healers, we who seek to be therapists, advisors, protectors of our children, we come to you now at a time in our nation that is very disturbing. A time when children and their safety is of great concern. Safety in the home, safety with regards to parenting, safety on the street, safety in regards of sexual predatorship, safety in terms of conflict management, safety in the schools, safety from gangs, and so it goes on. But as we meet here this evening, during Child Month and during Family Month and proximate to the recent Mental Health Week, we do ask you to guide all our presentations, discussions, and sharing and our learning, that we may be better equipped and greater committed to give our absolute and total service to meet this great challenge. Amen. Thank you, Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Dr. Allen. Thank you so much. Allow me to thank you again for joining us. And our topic, as Dr. Allen has mentioned, some of the challenges that we have been seeing, and especially plaguing our Jamaica land we love. And we decided to focus on violence and violation, generational curse, or public health challenges. Allow me to introduce our moderator, Dr. Patrick Prendergast, and he is internationally recognized as a communication for development specialist with a focus in community media and rural development, sustainable, development and issues of Caribbean masculinities. He's also an active member of Optimist International and currently serves as International Board Director. Currently, he is the campus director of the University of the West Indies, Mona, Western Jamaica campus in Montego Bay, Jamaica. He is also the senior lecturer in the development communication at the Caribbean School of Media and Communication. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen all, I now leave you in the capable hands of Dr. Patrick Prendergast. Over to you now, Dr. Prendergast.
Thank you very much, Dr. Elizabeth Crossman. And first of all, let me also thank Dr. Anthony Allen for thank you both actually for the welcome and the prayer. Both have set the foundation for what should be a very, very insight-filled and hopefully instructive 3 hours of engagement around this very important topic: violence and violation, generational curse, or public health challenges. As you've heard, my name is Patrick Prendergast. I'm the campus director at the University of the West Indies, Mona, Western Jamaica campus. And I will try my best to guide you through this evening that's already filled with presentations from a top flight team of anthropologists, sociologists, psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, historians, theologians, communication specialists. It's really a top flight team that we've pulled together for this webinar. This is a group that's well experienced to help us through this topic, which is of such importance to our society right now. There is so much happening in our social spaces, especially those in which our children and our young people are engaged. That is not only frightening, but is demanding of us all urgent attention. So this webinar is about understanding. It is about enlightenment. It is also about encouraging and exploring solutions. That is why these experts in such areas as child development and adolescent behavior, social violence, community initiatives, social ideation, we've committed their energy to sharing with us this evening. And we hope that at the end of this engagement, we will leave here feeling empowered to take some action that will really help engender a safer and healthier social space for our children and our young people. Thank you so very much for joining us. And as I said, we really want you to feel engaged. We're going to have a set of presentations. Each presenter will make their presentation, and then we'll take possibly a question after each, but there is a little time at the back end of our evening for us to take several questions at that time. So we want to keep it tight, we want to keep it running, and we want to also give you an opportunity to ask a question and to get some kind of answer from our presenters. Our first presenter is social anthropologist, my friend, Dr. Herbert Gill. He's senior lecturer and head of the Department of Sociology, Psychology, and Social Work at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. He is well known in the field of criminology and violence prevention and is author of the book Males and Tertiary Education in Jamaica, along with Bishop Bryan. Gill is the only trained anthropologist of social violence in the Caribbean, with over 30 years of experience living with and studying youth gangs in Jamaica, other Caribbean countries, Central America, the United States, Europe, and Southern Asia. He has impacted policies in 3 Caribbean states to reduce violence, has been consulted by law firms on social violence across 4 regions, and contributes to over 20 international media houses, including the BBC, Associated Press, Reuters. He is the chairman of Fathers Inc., Fathers Incorporated, Children First Agency, and the National Council on Education, and sits on various commissions, task forces, and advisory councils aimed at national and regional development. His presentation at this webinar is titled, As We Fight One Another, Psychosocial Antecedents of Violence. Please welcome Dr. Herbert Gill.
Thank you very much, my colleague, Dr. Prendergast, Patrick, as we would say. Allow me to share, let me just share a model. All right, tell me if you can see that model, because that is what we are going to be talking about. Can you all see it very clearly?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you very much. All right. So for the next 20 or so minutes, let's examine what is causing violence in Jamaica. That's what we mean by antecedents. I put it another way. How do you create a state as violent as Jamaica? Because it had to be created. This level of violence is not accidental. So let's start from the very beginning. And this is where my first degree in history comes about. Jamaica has an absolutely beautiful and frightening history of violence. You will notice I use oxymoronic words, but stay with me. So we've had centuries of slavery, and then we've had colonial violence afterwards, and we've had several problems that lead to what we have. So I've created a model that helps to explain why the violence is so bad and will not get any better for a very long time until we begin to change some of these blocks. I want to go to the left side first, segmental factional politics. Now, segmental factional politics means that with the exception of 6% of Jamaicans were labor rights and comrades. There's very little middle ground. It is our identity. We make a lot of fuss about it. When I was a child, I had neighbors with donkeys, one called the donkey Manly, the other one called the other donkey. And I'm very serious. Like the JLP neighbor called his donkey Manly, and the PMP neighbor called his donkey Siaga. Yeah, that's what a lot of our children grow up in. We learn to be segmentary factional, and we learn how to actually shift this into stuff like Gaza and Gully. There's always a binary in Jamaica. The most recent one was anti-vaxxers and vaxxers. I had them on my radio program, and it was very insipid. Just listening to these people, not having the capacity to weigh things in an objective and scientific manner. And that is why I continuously describe Jamaicans as politically adolescent, because they genuinely don't weigh things. They say things on even my radio program, and I speak to them and ask them, what is it that you're saying? That is the first time they've actually thought about it. What they knew was to be emotional about things. Now, if you take the segmentary factionalism, it leads to something called weak central political authority. Now, the central political authority is made up of 4 blocks. The lowest block is called civic society, and that's made up of church, media, and various groups. And then the second block is security forces, made up of the JCF and the JDF. And that is, above that is the judiciary, which is, as we would say, lawyers and judges, our courthouse. And above that, of course, is the pinnacle of the central political authority, the Prime Minister and Parliament. Now, this is not a political statement. The entire central political authority of Jamaica is weak because it has not transitioned from being ruled to self-rule. You listen to Jamaicans right now talking about the Constitution, and already they are trying to see if they can make a political hustling out of it, rather than sit down in a mature way to say, we actually need to make that transition. And as I've warned today, even on radio, when this gets to a referendum, which the Constitution says it must do, people are going to vote JLP and PMP, and we're going to have something as funny as Brexit. And unfortunately, every time I make these predictions, that's exactly what happens. So let's go to so now you understand what we're saying. We have politicians who can politic, but they're not so good at governing. We have very poor transparency, poor accountability. We've even developed techniques of telling people that they are God. You can't say this. People keep asking the questions on my radio program. Who are the 6 that the Prime Minister spoke about? Why do you have an integrity commission if it has no vote? These are things that point to weak central political authority. And even media houses are part of this whole thing that weakens our system. So let's move back to the top. And this time we are going to go to the right side. The right side, out of slavery, right? And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you the data very accurately, very quickly. So right after slavery, we had some interesting things happening in Jamaica. When I say interesting, I mean very interesting. By 1948, if you look at that report, you're going to find something quite interesting, right? In 1948, we literally had a homicide rate of 3 per 100,000. 3 per 100,000. At independence, our homicide rate was 4.2 per 100,000. In 1948, if you look at any of those reports, you are going to see that 18% of children had a biological father living in their home. That 18% went to 21% in 1962, 27% in 1980, 33% in 1991, 37% in 2001, and in the 2016 survey of living conditions, you will see 42% of children have a biological father living in their household. This is intriguing. Father presence in Jamaica has soared tremendously, and mother presence has only dropped from 94% during this time to 84%. So our mothers have remained in the home. We've only lost a 10% because of what we call the new education economy. The volume of women who've gone on to become educated has only impacted us by dropping mother presence by 10%, by 10 percentage point. That's not 10%. Let's get our math correct. So for those who jump up and say, oh, it's because the women gone to work and gone to whatever and so forth, that has not been really the primary cause of our problem. And there's no monocausality. What you're looking at is a whole lot of mess happening at one time. So let's take our time. When we look at those data, right, if you look at those data, you're going to see something very interesting happening, right? You're going to see that when you break down mother data, you're going to see that for both mother and father, where the homicides are happening in Jamaica, or where the extreme violence is happening in Jamaica, right? So let's start with mother. What mother presence again was 84%. Father presence 42%. So we're looking here at a ratio of 2 to 1. There are twice more mothers than fathers in a household. I think that's very clear. It's not just clear, it's perfect, because 84 and 42 is a ratio of 1 to 2. Now let's look at what happens, and let me give you the data for inner city where the homicide rate is highest. What you're going to see is the homicide is the father presence dropping to 21% and mother presence dropping to 48%. It fascinates me that a lot of people, as they approach these data, they become gendered and they become propagandists. Let me go back to the figures. Father presence fell when you move to an inner city from 42%, which is the national figures, to 21%. That's a drop of 50%. Mother presence drops from 84% to 48%. That's a drop of 40%. So you're seeing a similar fallout in parent presence. Yet people have written tremendous books, awesome books that have received awards, saying what happens to fathers, but not what happens to mothers. And this is where the scientific part of me gets irritated, because that's garbage. So let's see what's happening to mothers. In every single violence audit I have done in Jamaica, in Belize, in Trinidad, I've done now 4 in Jamaica, and we're looking at 7 communities now for the government. We're seeing the exact same trend. As soon as you get into an area that is violent, you're beginning to see a weakening of mother presence dramatically and a weakening of father presence dramatically. But those are not my concerns. My concern is very specific. Sole parent households make up about 20% of Jamaica. Let me say that slowly so anybody can make a note of it, because it's not 59%, it's not 100%, it's not all the fancy propagandistic numbers you see. If you go, and I'll tell you where to look, if you go to the survey of living conditions, if you go to any data at all you look at, once it's real data, you're going to see something. I think you'll see 19.6%, and I think the one I've seen the most is 20.2%. So 1 of 5 households in Jamaica has only a single parent and no other persons living in that household. So now I'm going to break this down for you. When you take all sole parent mother household, not father this time, because 5% of Jamaican families are made up of father only. you're going to see 15.2% of mother only. 15%. Again, not 100%. So please do not entertain a conversation about every house in Jamaica or mother only, because that's not true. 15%. So this is what people call mother only household. If your father is not there, but you live with your grandma, your mother, your cousins, your aunt, that household is called an extended household. But for funding reasons, people just say, I'm a mother alone I live with. That's a lie. Because a child actually needs one stable and consistent parent or guard in order to be stable. And therefore, that kind of conversation cannot become scientific. But here's what the crazy part is. When we break down single mother household, again, let me remind you, that household has no support around it. We find 16 different types of sole parent household, 16 different types, which means there are 12 different types of sole mother household, 12 different types. And I am concerned with one. I'm concerned about a household that is going to produce a lot of violent people, because that household will have enormous amount of torture. So I'm going to now define torture for you. Torture, as defined by WHO and all violence experts, is not just ACs, it's consistent, intense punishment. Let's go again. In the context of children, of raising children, it is consistent and intense punishment. So if you beat a child regularly, which means at least once every 2 weeks, and it is intense, as in it breaks skin and so forth, you are going to find that that is actually torture. If you give a child a 5-star treatment, and let me see, let's go big, old, dirty thinking drunkard, which is a term we use in Jamaica a lot to describe our children, right? That's psychological torture. WHO has put 4 categories. There's physical, and boys are physically more tortured than girls. There is psychological, and both boys and girls are tortured equally. There is sexual, and we're going to get to that. Boys and girls go through that more than boys, but I'm going to help you clarify some areas there. And then there is the matter of neglect, where boys are far more neglected than girls. So when you look at this situation, you're going to find something that is really intriguing. In terms of torture in Jamaica, boys account for 2/3 of all torture in Jamaica. Those are just your hardcore facts. Because there are 4 different types we look at based on violence frames of the WHO. Now, let's shift now to the base of this. And this is a matter of fear factor and paramilitary policing. And I'm going to spend 2 minutes on that. In 1829, the Britons ended paramilitary Ulster policing in England and created what was called modern or new policing. What's modern or new policing? It's a setup whereby police are supposed to be on the street, they should cross your children, they should be there doing community policing, what we call today loosely community policing. On top of that, the Britons would have a set of special squads, the worst of which is called the Widowmaker. You do not want the Widowmakers to leave their base, because that's exactly what they are, Widowmakers. Now, in 1865, the Britons upgraded Jamaica from militia to what they had disposed of called paramilitary policing. And that has remained in place until today. In the year 2000, Francis Forbes, Barry Evans, Novlet Grant, myself, quite a number of persons started to work on this matter of getting police officers to have a first degree and to make it attractive for people who are educated. And since then, a lot has been achieved, but a lot more needs to happen. Who do people select for operations police? The ones that are least educated and mostly males. And they suffer from immense fear factor because a lot of them came from the very same background that they are now attacking. Why is this fear factor so strong? It is so strong because the reality is that 150, the homicide rate for the JCF is 150. The homicide rate for Jamaica is 49.8. You can round that off to 50 since you don't want to have a half human being. 50 per 100,000. And the JCF are 3 times more likely to die than civilian. You really don't want to be in that situation, and therefore you're always on edge. And if you look at how police in Jamaica, it is the emphasis quite often is on this matter of hard policing, right? Ripping through communities, making sure their presence are felt, and making sure young men feel this presence. But I'm going to tell you the damage that does, because there are 4 things a young male or a young female needs in order to be stable. Let's see if we get them. Food. And this is the principle of ontological security that is reworked by a team of people at SOAS in 2005, led by myself. And we covered 117 countries trying to understand the basic things that young people need in order to be stable. They need food, they need a sense of safety. So if the police and gunmen are always attacking them, that's a reason for them to join a gang. I hope this is making sense. So the more paramilitary we are, and the more gunmen, and the more you speak to young people and they say, I fear both gunmen and the police, is the more those young people are likely to join a gang. So food, sense of safety, sense of support. You have to have a family around you, and you've seen what our families look like. And the last one is opportunity structures. So that takes us now into the apartheid education and fractured patriarchy system. So you understand about the torture of boys, and many of you, if not most of you, I would assume, understand the damage that tortured boys or even tortured girls can do. Please also bear in mind, right? Let me see, 5 minutes more, right? Please also bear in mind that the mothers that we're concerned about are the mothers who were raped or tortured themselves as children. 80% of the mothers who torture their sons, as in, and by torture, let me give you some examples quickly, as in tie the boy to a tree where there's an ant's nest and rub chicken back fat on the boy. I needed to understand that, and I need to understand that these mothers are actually attempting to keep that boy away from gangs. But by doing so, she's driving him into a gang. So it's not that the mothers in Jamaica are cruel, it's because they're desperate, because 5% of all mothers in Jamaica, and this is what we've seen, 5% of mothers in the inner city have no support system, 0 support system. And over 90% of those mothers who have no support system were tortured themselves. They understand the impact of torture. And remember, we are coming from a history of violence of slavery where we, according to Frantz Fanon, understand torture. But let's go now to the crux of the matter. So we've spoken about the ACs, we've spoken about the political problems, we've spoken about why we like to fight each other so much, we've spoken about the segmented factionalism, the labor rights versus the comrades. Now we're going to talk about why we have this blow-up of violence, the apartheid in education. I want to point out I want to provide you with some material very quickly that may shock some of you. I'm going to take you through our school system very quickly. So in our first phase of education, we had, of course, Woolmer's boys, 1729, and Manning's boys, 1738. Those are the first 2 schools, followed by Jamaica College in 1789. When those 3 schools were created, they were created exclusively for white boys. They were not created for males, they were created for white boys. Phase 2 is the end of slavery, in which we have the colonial uprisings and the slave trade ended in 1807 and slavery ended in 1838, 34, and then emancipation in 1838. During that period, 4 schools were built in Jamaica: George's College 1850, Monroe 1856, and then, of course, we had what was called the Nuns' Protest, which caused us to build Immaculate Conception in 1856 and Hampton School in 1858. Then we move to the third phase, which is called the fracture of the United Kingdom. And during that, and you know that period is 1865 to the 1940s. And in 1865, of course, we constructed our police force. Let's go. During that period, we built, wait for it, 3 schools for boys. 3 schools were built for boys during this period. What's so important about this period? I'm going to help you understand. We built Cornwall College in 1896. We built Calabar in 1912 by a Black Baptist, right? And Kingston College in 1925. So during this period, we built 3 schools for boys. Ready for the girls. Woolmer's Girls separated, 1876. Westwood, 1882. Convent of Mercy Alpha, 1894. St. Hugh's, 1899. St. Hilda's, 1906. St. Andrew, right? That's how it is pronounced. 1925. Mount Alvernia, 1925. Montego Bay High, 1935. Marymount, 1935. Holy Childhood, 1937. So you are going to ask yourself, why on earth did we do that in Jamaica? Why did we build 3 schools for girls, for boys, but build 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 schools for girls? It's because during the breakup of the British Empire, the planters, and I've seen the microscripts myself in England, the planters had meetings in which they forced the church to build schools for girls because now there was contest. School was taking away their plantation labor. That's how we got to the fact that there are 15 all-girls schools in Jamaica and 7 all-boys schools. And I know many of us never understood this. How can we speak about being so patriarchal and have 15 all-girls schools and 7 all-boys schools? That's crazy. Has to be a matter of slavery and its residue. And so we moved to phase 4, and I close very quickly, right? In 1960, we built the Carteret College, and it was upgraded to a grammar school. And then in 1976, it was forced to be co-ed. Right after independence, we're still doing it. And then we have the Queen's School in 1953, and then we have what is considered to be the most painful, Merle Grove School, which was built for boys by Miriam Speed, turned into an all-girls school. Don't take the planters after slavery lightly. They were very serious. They collected their 20 million pounds for us as property, and they went on to ensure that they had schools for girls, even though patriarchy and racism never allowed girls to attend these schools until after the 1970s, in which we had a Roots program under Michael Manley. So for those who don't understand, why were these schools always there but not filled? Not until the 1970s. And that's when you begin to see the shift in Jamaica. Now, on top of that, we have the work of somebody called Professor Patricia Anderson. She showed that none of these things sent Jamaica into a crisis yet. In the 1970s, we were setting up our civil war. Civil war was fought. In 1980, for that election, 888 young people killed. But that's not what did the damage, per se. The damage was completed when the entire world began to shift from heavy industries to service industries. Now, Patrick, back in the 70s, you didn't need a PhD. You didn't need all of this fancy stuff. You just needed to work hard and get promoted based on experience in a backside company and do well. But then those things started to die, and now you need to be in school. But what happens now? We have an apartheid in education in which suddenly education is important. So in the 1970s and even early 80s, you could have a secondary school education and earn more than your wife and be the man. But not anymore. Education became suddenly important as the millennium ended, because now we are in an era where you need a first degree as your most basic skill in education. And all of that shift. I do 2 and 3 graduations every summer. I have 4 this summer. And I guarantee you, once I walk into a school and I ask the principal who normally sits beside me on the podium, what's your school ratio? And they say 68% boys. I know where I am. I'm in hell. Those schools are called Tier 4 schools. There are 32 Tier 4 schools in Jamaica. These schools for the last decade, for the last 2 decades, don't get more than 5% matriculation pass. Matriculation pass means, of course, 5 subjects including math and English. Now I'm going to give you the results very quickly and then we can wrap up. Here are your results. And I'm telling you now what the schools look like and why we call it apartheid. So if you attend an all-girls school, you have an 89% chance of going to university. If you attend an all-boy, 64%. If you attend a co-ed, right, 69%. If you attend a co-ed, right, we're not talking about Glenmore people. We know Glenmore people is the exception, and Campion, you're going to end up with 64%. Right? If you go to a technical school, 17% of you will matriculate. If you go to a new secondary school, only 10% of you will matriculate. Now, I can run this for you very quickly. To the most educated, the human being in Jamaica with the highest probability of education and matriculation is considered to be a suburban dwelling girl who attends an all-girls school. She has a 99.15% chance of going to university. Let's go right down to the slide now. Inner city male, he has a 3.01% chance of going to university. And God bless him. It has to be the church or a group of people or the Don who sends him. Now, when you have a setup like that, you are going to have organized crime in Jamaica. And what puts the lid on the pot that makes it boil? Fractured patriarchy. Despite all the progress of women, they have not asked men to stop providing money. Wouldn't that be lovely? If the men are so oppressed and depressed and suppressed, why still take their money? Because of a system we now describe as anthropologists of violence, all of us as anthropologists of violence have decided it is called fractured patriarchy. Because patriarchy has 2 sides to it. It has beneficial masculinity and it has hegemonic masculinity. Let's look at hegemonic very quickly. It says, block 1, a man should have power over women, children, and lesser men. Right? Whoever you define to be lesser men. Block 2, a man should be able to have sex whenever he wants. Block 3, a man should be able to have sex with whoever he wants. And block 4, a man should be able to have children, as many children as he wants. Now, nobody wants that block. It's called hegemonic masculinity. We have written books upon books upon books to suppress that because that's cruel. But then we have another side of masculinity. 84% of all female education involves a man. These are the data we have in front of us now. Let me say it again, 84% of all tuition you see in front of you being paid includes a man. Father remains number 1, and boyfriend and sex promise partner, notice the term sex promise partner, is right on the cusp, 42 and 41%. Those are the data we have in front of us. And then he's expected to nurture and to be sexually compatible and all the beneficial stuff. And I have therefore, in international fora, say, why not just abandon all of that and have partnership? And the data for partnership says only 3%, the average line for intimate partner violence in Jamaica is 25%. The people who have partnership in which friends, they work as friends or as teams, and they share everything and they work together, 3.1%. But when my students last year did the study and interviewed women across Jamaica, do you want partnership? Gen Z women, 37% says yes. Millennials, 28%, and women over the age of 35, 18% of them agreed with partnership. We have a lot of work to do to solve this violence. And it's not going to be about policing. It's going to be about everybody becoming rational and reasonable and end some of the propaganda and begin to look at the data and begin to work with the data and to say all of us here have played a part in the kinds of homicide we have. We're the fourth most violent place on earth. And we've been like this since the year 2000. It's not going to go anywhere unless there's a cultural change and a reinvestment in our people and a change in the relationships we have with each other that requires what I call FAR: respect, ownership, yes, fairness, ownership, and respect. Once we get to those cultural changes, we're going to see our children being treated better. We're going to have less people carrying harm and hurt. And remember, my closing words to you, remember, damaged people are attracted to each other because they understand each other. But they make up 79% of the mayhem in our homes. So a lot of work needs to be done, and it involves all of us. But it also involves academics writing more scientific work and write less from gut feelings, which I always say should take you to the toilet, and write from rigorous science by looking at the data that includes everybody. Blessings.
Thank you very much, Herbs. Dr. Herbert Gale, at one of my colleagues online, Herb, you know, I really wanted you to give me at least 5 minutes so I could take a question. But knowing how you are, I mean, you just present it as you see it, as you've analyzed it, and as one of my colleagues online say, you know, I mean, you dissect the issues so well, devoid of pandering, and just get straight to the issues. I mean, this was a tour de force. It's a blazing way to start our webinar this evening. I mean, looking at the creation of our violent society. As I said, it never just happened overnight. I mean, it's a real tour of the history, the politics, the economics, and the education around, you know, this whole business of violence. And of course, as usual, you're able to really just sift through the noise and kind of diminish the propagandist agenda that we know out there. And I really appreciate the way you have, you know, just put the issues squarely on the table, and the calls that you are making on everybody to be involved in the solution. Of course, you know, the people, some of the folks who are engaged in this webinar are actually, you know, doing it for their professional credits and so on. So you would have given them enough time to make notes, and we appreciate that. So again, we have about 10 minutes at the back end at which we're going to, you know, take some questions. But you know, Dr. Gale, I really want to thank you for that opening salvo.
Let me just say, I have to run down to the gender meeting that's downstairs. I will come back in time
okay, appreciate
the questions. All right,
appreciate it, because I think there is going to be there are going to be questions. I know the gender differentiation and in relation to the perpetrators of violence in our society is one of those areas that I know people want to also explore.
So I appreciate a call when you're ready for me. I'm gonna run.
Thank you.
All right, good.
Thank you very much. And I see that Dr. Walcott is here with us, and he's up next. Dr. Walcott will be presenting on the impact of structural violence on mental health and well-being. But before he goes into his presentation, let me just tell you a little bit. Dr. Jeffrey Walcott is currently the consultant psychologist, psychiatrist, and clinical director for Psychotherapy Associates Limited, and a member of the steering committee and director of the preceptorship program for management of schizophrenia for Janssen Pharmaceutical Latin America and Caribbean. He has published 24 peer-reviewed journal articles, 2 book chapters, as well as served as reviewer for 3 international journals and guest editor for Frontier in Psychiatry Academic Journal. He has also presented at clinical conferences locally, regionally, and internationally. He's the co-principal investigator on a Grand Challenges Canada grant 033404 funded research project and subsequent grants from the Ministry of Education Transition to Scale program, for which he received the Principal's Award for Most Outstanding Research Activity in 2015. He has worked as a consultant psychiatrist in charge of community mental health services for the parishes of Kingston and St. Andrew in the Southeastern Regional Health Authority, Jamaica. He was born in Clarendon, Jamaica, and attended Clarendon College, where he received the B.O. Fraser Reed Award for Chemistry. He furthered his education at the University of the West Indies, Mona, where he received his MBBS degree in medicine and his DM in psychiatry. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to this webinar our good friend, Dr. Jeffrey Walcott.
Thank you so much, Sir Prendergast. It's good to see you again. All right. So I'm going to try to be as concise as possible because I too want to get to some of the questions with Professor Gale. And the truth is, half of the substance on the presentation that I have is based on Herbert's work. So I really want to get back to some of the things that he's uncovered. But suffice it to say,
call him up.
yeah, man, I need to talk with him.
Yes.
But let us actually look at what I'm focused on now, which is the structural violence, business of structural violence, looking at Jamaican perspective. Now, our little island, Jamaica, is a small Caribbean island with about 2.8 million people. When you look at most large countries and populations, we're not even the population of a street, let alone an entire country. And despite our small size, we have made tremendous impact on the global scene. And to be fair to our country, a lot of it has been positive. So we have produced exceptional artists, music, in the realm of music, poetry, athletics, Usain Bolt, and a whole slew of track and field stars throughout the years since our independence and before. However, Jamaica's little paradise has a significant problem because we're also the best in one particular area as well. And that is we are one of the leading violence producers over the past 20 years. And we've had a steady increase in the murder rate in our country since the 1970s upward. And since the implementation of El Salvador's crackdown on crime, Jamaica, as of last year, was actually #1 in the world, with a murder rate that is almost 10 times higher than the global average. We're ranked #1 with a bullet. Yeah. And which has led to the State Department of the United States heightened travel warnings for citizens coming to our country. So we have a huge issue and a huge problem. But this is not a random occurrence. The entire island is not overrun with criminals and murderers. Yeah, most of the violence is confined to a small geographic location, 5 parishes and a few communities. And this is one of the paradoxes in the island, because outside of these areas, when you remove them from the statistics, Jamaica is probably one of the safest countries in the world. We also see the issue of violence spilling over in our school communities. We have seen these headlines from time to time about fights occurring in our schools, violent encounters, and we oftentimes blame it on the restriction that occurred during COVID and the fact that the children missed out on socialization. But we've had high murder rates in schools from before that. Yeah. So this is the thing that is troubling and that we need to look at. Now, in 1969, there was a paper in Journal of Peace Psychology by Johann Galton that tried to describe the archetype of violent behavior. And he identified that when we look at violence as a whole, the business of direct violence or interpersonal violence was actually just the tip of the iceberg. And he recognized that direct violence was fueled by the hidden and insidious areas of both structural and cultural violence, which acted under the microscope, but were impactful in both initiating and sustaining interpersonal violence within social settings and communities. So what's the definition? Structural violence is defined as action built into the structures of a society which show up as unequal power and unequal life chances, unequal distribution of resources, and the unequal distribution of power to decide over the distribution of those resources. And this is the area that I want to focus on. Cultural violence is really acts of symbolism that are permeating through the belief system of a society that justify or legitimize direct violence or structural violence against a particular sect of the society, it's against a particular group. And Herbert went through a beautiful dispensation of the differences in terms of access to resources, both in terms of, and Herbert introduced me to this word, and it's now become one of my favorite words, ontological security among the different societal structures and communities that exist in our country, but also the difference in terms of access to education and educational opportunities, and the stark difference between those that live in a particular geographic area and those who do not. And so these are some of the structural issues that we are facing. So if direct violence is what is seen as when the Titanic was floating along that fateful night, it is merely the tip of the iceberg. The thing that is sinking our society is what lies underneath. It is the permeation of cultural and structural violence that exists in resource allocations in our country. And when we look at our societal structure, Carl Stone did a beautiful dispensation of where our societal core values emanate and come from. And he identified the so-called agencies of social transformation and change. And of course, we have the business of the family, the school, the workplace, church, sports, creative areas of activities, and politics. And of course, in recent times, we have the social media spaces, which has now become quite influential, especially in the minds of our young people. And Herbert again went through a lot when it comes to looking at the family structure and things that affect the family dynamics. What I want to actually look at is how the societal structures were developed and how they permeate and they continue to precipitate acts of structural violence and deficits within the persons that live there. And I want to bring our attention to this book that was written many years ago by Irving Goffman that was looking at describing the madhouse, asylum papers. Irving Goffman identified that when persons were in the madhouse, that the madhouse itself created a sort of mental illness or psychopathology in the inhabitants that had nothing to do with the reason why they were there. And he outlined some of the symptoms of this, that most of the persons that were institutionalized or had institutional neurosis had levels of apathy, lack of initiative, lack of interest in things and events, submissiveness, no expression of feelings or resentment at whether things were harsh or unfair. Factors associated, loss of contact with outside worlds and other communities, the business of enforced idleness, brutality, and browbeating. And I want us to pay very close attention to these symptomatology, because when you look at some of our societies and our cultures and you walk around, I mean, I remember some time ago there was a mental little gentleman that was hanging out of the wall at Kingston Public Hospital that was threatening to jump off on the gate below. And the crowd that gathered around him was screaming one thing and one thing only: jump, because it was entertaining. So they had that lack of expression and empathy that we see in persons who are oppressed in institutional neurosis. And many of these institutions seem to function merely as storage dump for inmates, creating communities that only serve the purpose of sequestering the unwanted and those that you do not wish to permeate in good society. So it acts more as a prison than a refuge, than a place of dwelling. It acts as a prison for persons who are there because they are not allowed to leave. They are not allowed to engage in employment outside of menial tasks and manual labor. Yeah? But usually they present themselves to the public as rational organizations. So beautiful communities springing up, free housing, social supportive housing, all of these things. And they are effective machines of producing a few official avowed and unofficial approved ends. So they are great PR campaigns. We've built this community for the poor people who live on the streets, and we've created this fantastic area for them to live and stay away from the good people that we do not want them to mingle. And this is the reality of how our social structure is created. Total institutions are created as a place of work and residence, where a great number of similarly situated people, cut off from the wider community for a considerable time, together lead an enclosed, formally administrative round of life, and is usually set up in a way where there's a hierarchical structure of discipline that is reinforced from brutality and oppression. And Jamaica as a society was born in this. It was molded by it. Yeah, we came out of the plantation system, and there is no greater example of an institutional neurotic creating entity than the European plantation system for the slaves. Because slavery was not just about forced labor. Slavery was a system of social engineering, where the society was engineered by brutality, trauma, cruelty, fear, where there was dehumanization of the enslaved people, where they were considered 3/5 human, and they were reared for absolute subservience to white, where there was a skewed authority relation, and the main objective of ownership was absolute sexual and vocational exploitation. That was the system of slavery and what it meant. So when people speak about this business of people being enslaved in other societies, that they were forced labor, it has nothing to do with what chattel slavery was. Chattel slavery had nothing to do with work. It was a means of stripping away the humanity of an ethnic group based solely on the color of their skin and the proximity that they were to ease of trade, and the fact that they actually were resilient and able to survive in harsh environments that white people were not. And we are well aware of some of the cruel punishments that were meted out with slavery. And one of the issues, and this is a beautiful by George Beckford, because George Beckford highlights that, in fact, the plantation is best defined, not in terms of what the crop was that they grew, because nobody cared. When we talk about things like the plantation in Montego Bay, White Roosevelt plantation, nobody knew what was grown on that plantation, but we knew the White Witch. We knew stories of cruelty, we knew stories of murder, because that was what the plantation was known for. The absolute authority and absolute cruelty of those that were in charge. And the question you might ask would be, how could this be allowed? What happens to those that were put in charge of the society, to lead the society? And we oftentimes forget that the Jamaican society, the first governor general of this country, was a criminal, was a pirate, Sir Henry Morgan. And our political leadership has not deviated much from that legacy. And we've seen it time and time again. And I'm not casting shadows on any particular side, but the newspaper is bereft with all of these issues of corruption. And we have the corruption index if you wish to look for it, so you know where I'm standing. So the issue and the business of colonization is that it was not just about stripping or holding the people to work, but it was in a kind of perverted logic, structured on warping, perverting, and turning the past of the people, oppressed people, to a sense where you actually destroy their sense of who they were. So out of this history and the historical context was birthed the communities that we look at that were underserved, underutilized. And there are specific communities because they did not spring up. They did not come about naturalistically. They were created. Figaro in 1996, in his collection of work on communities in Jamaica from 1960 to 1993, actually identified the fact that the garrison communities were birthed out of a social engineering process, which again took place in our country as a response to scarce benefits and spoils after independence. Yeah, and we saw the development of, in the independence, of polarization of our people. Yeah, Jamaica's first political constructed inner city garrison, Tivoli Gardens, and the garrison system was set up not unlike slavery plantation, where the institutions were set up to weaken the residents, remove their sense of self-identity, to ensure conformity to the institutional rules. And the residents would typically wear uniforms, and the uniforms were stripped away from the slave attire to now the political attire, which is no different because they were still beholden to a particular master, but no feeling that they had somehow some level of engagement and control and buying, but they did not, because they were just exploited again and utilized for the few avowed ends of those in charge. So the total institutions have total control over the lives of their inmates, patients, or whatever the people who live in them are called. Yeah, and they are appointed the overseers. And in the garrison communities, the overseers were the dons. And it was and they were fueled first by the political upheaval, then by the drug war. And now we're seeing the interjection of the scamming or the chopper funding. And also, we're now seeing murders for hire. So the total institution subject their residents to harsh treatment and quite often abuse. Christopher Charles and Orwell Beckford wrote a paper that looked at the informal justice system in the garrison constituencies and found that the informal justice system of garrison communities in the inner city areas of Jamaica undermined the rule of law in the country. And they had outlined punishments that were meted out for even the most minuscule crimes. And the Jamaican state that they want needed to show its willingness to work with these residents and to use a partnership as a model to recreate and restructure and bring these societies back into the fold. And this was especially important post-2010, for those that did not know that, the incursion in Tivoli Gardens. And again, post-2010, just like in the 1960s and 70s, we dropped the ball and we allowed the resurgence of murders and violence within the system and structure. And the other areas that I focus on outside of the communities now is the area that has the greatest potential to transform the lives of our young people, which is the school system. And as Herbert quite rightfully pointed out, that the colonial system of education was never set up for our people. The colonial system of education bred a lack of self-confidence among blacks in their own ability to manage their own affairs. To this day, it is structured to provide psychological oppression to our people. And we have to remove the business. We just, in this particular 10 years, remove corporal punishment, stop beating the children into submission, because that's slavery system. And we also recognize that our schools are fighting a battle where they're losing our children. And when you look at the murder rate in our country, the majority of people who are incarcerated for murder are between the age of 16 to 25. These are young people that should be in school. And again, Herbert Gale did a study that showed that if a child completed the educational system, whether they got a subject or not, the mere fact that if they completed the education system, there was a tenfold reduction in their willingness and ability to engage in criminal activity. So we know the areas that need to be targeted. We know where these areas are, because there was a study that was done that highlighted, of all the people that are incarcerated in this country, which schools they actually came from. And people went and had renting of clothes, gnashing of teeth and crying, but they, as Herbert pointed out, forgot to look at the statistics and only went with their gut. That how dare you accuse your school. But as he said, your gut feelings are only good for the toilet, because the statistics show that the majority of these inmates did not complete school. They dropped out as early as primary school, and very few of them made it past secondary school. So we know one of the clear interventions that need to be done, right? And we also know something else. When you look at the schools that had the highest prevalence of incarcerated, when you point them on a map, and this map is looking at the corporate area distribution of children who have been shot, not who have been beaten, but who have been shot, and you put these 5 schools in those areas where they are from, something very interesting occurs. You recognize that these children who are most involved in criminal activity are coming from areas that they are most likely to be shot. Cannot be a coincidence. Cannot be a coincidence. So we have to focus on, one, the areas that we can actually do the intervention, and where the evidence is showing us is most effective. School is the advertising agent, which makes you believe that a society is what you need. Yeah. And we oftentimes forget, because we chastise people about being morally bereft and that these children are lost. But we oftentimes forget that morality is not an innate trait. You are not born good. You are taught how to be good. Yeah, it's a consequence of societal conditioning. So we are creating people with great moral deficits. It means that our society is failing our population. And this is obvious. And we do recognize that there's an intimate connection between complex trauma and intrapsychic emotional pain in children. And children do not present pain suffering in terms of sadness. They present it in acts of violence. And we recognize, again, I have to put Herbert up there again, we recognize that violence transforms these children into the monsters that we claim they are to be. But it is we, the society, that has not given these people who are raising these children the support, the level of stability, the ontological security for them to be able to produce healthy members of our society. It is we who are probably the monsters, because we have these people raising these children with the only tools that they know, desperation and violence, who are themselves abused. And they create the children who are murdering people in droves. Yeah, and we know that especially peculiar thing happens when a child is traumatized by their primary caregiver. And this was a book by Judith Herman that highlighted that, especially when a child is tortured by their primary caregiver, the child develops a contaminated, stigmatized sense of identity. So the child victim takes on the evil of the abuser into herself or himself, and thereby preserves a primary attachment to her parents, because the inner sense of badness preserves a relationship. It is not readily given up even after the abuse has stopped. Rather, it becomes a stable part of the child's personality structure. Why my mother, they have a torture me with, I'm becoming a real bad man. And so the relationship is kept with the mother. And this person now becomes the embodiment of the violence and the torture and the evil that was meted out by their caregivers. And this is what we have in our society. Yeah, and we do recognize the link. And we've looked at the figures. We did a study and looked at the ACEs in a group of 8-year-old children in this country. 8-year-old children that were supposed to be protected from stable homes, right? Randomly selected 428. 92% had an adverse childhood experience. The average was 3. And in the literature, 4 puts you at great risk for suicide. And these are 8-year-old children. They're not even at the age where you have sexual abuse coming in, yet they're already living with torture at 8 years of age. And then what we see is the after effect is that almost 1 million Jamaicans have personality disorder. 40% of them have a diagnosis. And these are the people that end up in prison. And education and intelligence cannot save you. Because when you looked at the study of incarcerated people, 15% of the condemned murderers had IQ scores in the superior to very superior range. Double that of what you find in normal population. So the brightest and the best within these communities, because of the environment that they grew up in, turn to crime and violence. And so it is not a business of them failing themselves, it's a business of our society failing them. Right? 6% of them have the diagnosis of psychopathic antisocial personality disorder. So we see that. And so it's important and imperative that if we're going to focus the interventions and we're going to spend the resources, we have to do it where it counts. We know we can capture these children in school because they have to go. And most of the evidence shows that schools are the primary places for promoting positive aspects of mental health, using school-based interventions and whole school approach. And we've done it several times. 2013, there was a behavioral modification committee of which I was a part with the late Frederick Hickman. And there were numerous interventions that were created, tested, implemented, and replicated in schools that were impactful in transforming some of these children. And then, as with all things that go the way of our country, everything fluctuates once there's political tides and shifts. We know that we have the institutions developed, and again, the University, West Indies has played a significant role. And what we've realized is this. In our society, the greatest area or time for intervention is between the age of 0 to 3. If we can do that, majority of our children will become healthy adults, healthy adolescents, and be very productive in our society. And in fact, 60% of our population are healthy people, but there's a 40% that you miss at the 1,000 day of life because of lack of ontological security in their parents, in their mothers, and they are not able to provide a safe space for these children to grow up and develop. And they become mentally unhealthy adolescents, transgressive, unproductive, and violent adults. And we have created intervention programs to help and shift the balance to bring those back into the fold of healthy, productive society. So I will end with this slide of what happens in our community. In our community, we expect the healthy people to go into employment, entrepreneurial job placement. Some migrate, some going to existing institutions, tertiary training institutions, secondary schools. But we need a rescue plan for those that do not. We have to focus on interventions at 0 to 3, parenting attachment, 4 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 14, and 15 to 25, as well as adult community engagement programs to be able to capture those that require the extra help. And we have to be targeted, not a hairy-fairy. We cannot create social health programs where most of the expenses fall on pockets before it goes to help the people. These things have to be put to an end. They must be terminated. We have to rethink how we structure our environment and our community. Because as COVID has shown us, when things get tough and the airports close, we're all on the same rock, floating in the same ocean, and we're all stuck in the same boat. So if we do not become part of the solution, we're going to be a consequence of the problem. And I end it there. I hope I did not go over time.
Only by 1 minute. Thank you so much, Dr. Walcott. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, you started out with helping us to appreciate the paradise that we call Jamaica, but on the other side, we're also known for this high level of violence, and how you've managed to take that history and associate it with with what's happening in terms of our psychosocial behaviors, and certainly this has really been another of those very interesting what you'd call analysis of the situation beyond how we normally would look at what's in front of us in terms of this violence and social fallout that's in front of us, the cultural violence, the structural violence, the direct violence. The tip of the iceberg metaphor stands out for me. Really important for us to recognize that there is a deeper connection that we have to explore. But also in terms of how we manage this notion of absolute authority, and how that's manifesting itself even down to today's society. And what are we seeing today? It's exactly what's playing out in our schools, what's playing out in our behaviors and our relationships one with the other. I mean, the psychological, the sociological fallout, especially among our young people, and the ways, as you said, the way our society is actually failing to address the trauma and the pain and the violence, and of course the high rates of personality disorder. That's what is manifesting as a consequence of this failing on our society to address the real problem. But and I think this is a nice segue as well, when you raise the issue of morality and how we treat with morality, how we see morality. It's a nice segue to our next presenter, looking at the religious framework or the theological framework within which we can speak to these matters that are in front of us. But Jeffrey, I really want to also thank you for not only tracing that relationship in terms of the history and the structural and cultural violence and what's happening at the direct level at which we see it, but to share with us those examples of the transformative initiatives that are actually there. And it's just, again, in many instances, I mean, what you're doing, Carrie Mensa and so on, is really for us to just get back to some of these and kind of do a little bit more advanced work in them. We can't just let them be. They're good examples, solid examples of those possibilities, and we want to be able to explore that some more. So again, I know you're staying with us because you have a little tete-a-tete with Herbert to come, but there are questions that are also out there for you. So we're going to move quickly to our next presenter, Reverend Dr. Glenroy Layla. And another of I'm happy I can claim all of these people as my friends, you know. Reverend Dr. Glenroy Leila started his career as a graduate from the University of the West Indies with a Bachelor of Arts in History and Social Studies. He later went on to obtain a diploma in Ministerial Studies at UTC, we love to call it the United Theological College of the West Indies, followed by a Bachelor of Arts degree in Theological Studies at the University of the West Indies. And in 2009, Reverend Leila was awarded a doctorate in theology from UWI. Reverend Leila has been a member of the Jamaica Baptist Union Executive for over 20 years, served on the Baptist World Alliance Doctrine Commission since 2015, and has been a member of the Standing Commission of the World Council of Churches Commission on Faith and Order since 2007. He is the immediate past president of the Jamaica Baptist Union. Currently, he is the senior minister of the Bethel Baptist Church Halfway Tree. Reverend Leila is married to Dr. Sharon Leila, and they have one son, Dominic. And I will tell you, I know that he is a great public speaker and a very engaging lecturer. So please let us welcome Reverend Dr. Glenroy Leila, who will explore the topic for us, violence and violation, the theological framework for understanding and responding. Dr. Leila.
Thank you, Dr. Prendergast. Good evening, sisters and brothers, if you don't mind me saying that. Thank you for this kind invitation to share in this webinar. I feel as if I'm trespassing on in a space where I have found so stimulating. Both the presentations earlier, Dr. Gale and Dr. Walcott, I think has really set the foundation and has been a real treat. I would have been happy just to sit and listen to those presentations. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to share, and I hope to, as we continue, to learn and to receive some more insights from other members of the panel later on. The theme that you have presented us with is violence or violation, generational curse, or public health challenge. Well, it invites a response, and I would confine my comments to the biblical and theological perspective. I'm not going to trespass into any other area. The generally accepted definition of violence by the World Health Organization is that it is the intentional use of physical force or power, threatened or actual, against oneself, another person, or against a group or a community, that either results or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, development, and deprivation. As a general definition of violence offered by the World Council of Churches, and Dr. Gale earlier gave us the four types, if you wish, of violence. Using theological language, you would say that violence would be anything that mars or defaces the image of God in whom we are created, that human beings are created in God's image. We therefore have dignity, value, and worth. Anything that mars the image of God in us is often a cause or result of violence. And violence generally violates the principle of neighbor love. Love your neighbor as yourself. And violence is a violation of that principle. It further destroys the wholeness that God intended for all of creation. That's the understanding we have, that God intended for the creation to be whole. And the Hebrew use a word to describe that wholeness. The word they use is shalom. And that shalom vision is essentially to be at peace with God, to be at peace with oneself, to be at peace with our neighbor, and to be at peace with the environment in which we live. That's a shalom. So that's violence, and God's intention is for us to have or to live in shalom. what we have been experiencing in Jamaica, as has been so eloquently presented for us or to us over in the last two presentations, over many decades, we have been experiencing not just violence, but Dr. Gale talks about torture, and some theologians talk about cruelty. And cruelty is defined and understood as an intense, frequent, prolonged, and destructive form of violence. It is also the excessive exercise of power over the utterly powerless. So we have been experiencing, and there's no doubt about it, and the last two presentations did show us in very clear ways that we are excelling in being violent. The police who love to use the word violence producers, that we have been very productive in being violence producers. We are excelling in the world and an area we don't want to excel in. What I want to do in this brief conversation we'd like to have this evening, I would like to begin with an observation that in a country where the Judeo-Christian ethic prevails, in a country where the church is dominant, and if you look at the census, if this one will come out, it has shown that whereas most countries of the now developed world, you'll notice that Christianity, those who claim affiliation to Christianity, has now fallen below 50% in United Kingdom, in Australia, and in other parts of the world, that we are still, it has been falling in Jamaica, but we are still way up in the 70s, at least the census before the last. So it is a fact that a large section of the Jamaican population regard themselves as having some affiliation to church or to a Christian community. And when I hear Dr. Gale talk about the role of the mothers in this whole situation, it is also a fact that 75% of church membership are made up of women. Women make up about 75% of the membership of the church. So I would like to make the observation that in this country in which we live, where the Judeo-Christian ethic has been dominant, that the Bible is often used to justify, to normalize, and to legitimize violence and cruelty, which is often inflicted upon all kinds of people, including and especially children. That is essentially a point I would like to make in this conversation, that a part of our problem, I think Dr. Walcott will say, a part of the cultural violence that we face is that we are in a situation and in a space where violence, cruelty, torture has been normalized. And here's a way that we can see it. This is anecdotal, but this is a way we can see it. When somebody dies in Jamaica, or 4 or 5 persons are killed, we listen to the newscasts and then we move on to the next item, and within 2 or 3 minutes we can forget about it. We are passing those scenes on the road and persons will stop and take picture, and that's what they will do. When I talk to some friends in other parts of the world, if someone is stabbed with a knife, it becomes the major headline they tell me for weeks, the major headline for weeks. And that is when we know that we have been so socialized, we have been living in this space, this violent space for so long, that it has become now normal for us. It has been normalized in many ways. And I'm making the observation that the church has played a role in normalizing violence and cruelty by using the Bible to justify that. And we hear this in private and public debate, where the Bible and God is often cited as authorizing, mandating acts of violence. One example, we hear it in the support for capital punishment. The Bible says an eye for an eye, so therefore it is okay. And if a man killed, by man, person has died, so by the hand of man, another person shall die. I mean, I'm not quoting it exactly. And most recently, right now, in the conversation concerning corporal punishment, to oppose it in some quarters is presented as a departure from the biblical injunction, most often quoting Proverbs 13, verse 24, which says, "Whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them." So there is and has always been some ambiguity, a kind of a nexus between the church and violence from the time Christianity entered the Caribbean space as a bedfellow, complicit with the colonial project. From that time, the church has, if not openly complicit, turned a blind eye, rationalized and justified some forms of violence, and that has played a contributing role in a Judeo-Christian environment, a contributing role in normalizing violence in our society. It has been done in the way that I've explained a little earlier, that people will cite biblical authority and cite biblical mandate. And in so doing, what they have done is what we say in theology is a kind of a warped hermeneutic, meaning a different kind of interpretation. What they have done is taken the text out of its original context and ignore the general message of the Bible and twisting it to make the point. So it amounts to selective interpretation of certain passages taken from its context and presented as divine mandate. Let us take the example I offered earlier. An eye for an eye is taken as it is okay and normal for us to take revenge. But the issue in that particular text was not revenge, you know. The issue in that conversation given to the primeval people was not about revenge. It was about proportionality. And if a man cuts off your finger, don't cut off his hand. That would not be proportional. And if one of your eyes is gouged out, don't chop off the person's head. That would not be proportional. The issue there is proportionality. And in a sense, in a society where cruelty was rampant, it was really introduced as a means of tempering the violence and showing mercy. But the way we have used it now is to justify violence. It is interesting to note that persons are often very willing to quote those passages taken out of its context from the Old Testament. But if you read it within the context in which they were written, what you will find is that there are some other passages there with some other injunction that they ignore, conveniently ignore, such as if a child disobeys, or if a person, not a child, a person disobeys their parents, they should be stoned to death. That is conveniently ignored from the same passage. It is not taken as something we should pass on and keep doing now. Similarly, if someone commits adultery, they should be stoned to death. No, that is not happening or taken as acceptable behavior for us. So the major challenge we face is that in the society where violence has been normalized, there is no wholesale rejection of violence. There's no wholesale rejection of it because all of the socializing agencies of society seem to accept and to normalize some kind of violence. It is okay once it is not directed towards me. So if a man thief the goat, it's okay to chop him up. That's fine. So stealing a goat, the response is to chop him up. If somebody has committed some kind of a crime, whatever it is, them for dead, all of them for dead. And all of that is contributing to a society where we have kind of normalized this kind of a situation, accepted it. And once we start to do that, then it's kind of the thin edge of the wedge. Where do you stop, really? Where do you stop? So violence was originally absent from God's good creation. If you're taking the message of the Bible as a whole, it was originally absent from God's good creation. Human beings are created in God's image. I said it earlier, to share life with God and to share life with each other on earth and with all of the created beings on earth. And that is done for the flourishing of all. That's what the story of creation in Genesis and the recreation that comes right out down to Jesus is proclaiming. In this creation, as proclaimed by Jesus, violence cannot be overcome by violence. Any violent resistance against violence is subject to the same logic and will only continue this cycle of violence. In the words of the Mahatma Gandhi, an eye for an eye will only make the whole world blind. So violence has to be interrupted at the source. And that was the message of Jesus in that famous Sermon on the Mount, proclaimed from St. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 5, where in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus went up to a mountain and then gave these commandments where he said, "You have heard it said, but I now say unto you." And in Matthew's community, which was largely Jewish Christians, they were presenting Jesus as this new Moses, that Moses went up to the mountain and came down with the new commandment. Jesus is now going up to this mountain and is coming with the new commandment. So this is the kind of life. This is the Jesus saying, this is how I am the true interpreter of the law. And in interpreting the law, this is what is expected of you, that violence has to be interrupted. So what he taught in that sermon is that you should turn the other cheek, you should love your enemy, you should pray for those who persecute you. It was not to say that people should willingly submit to any kind of abuse, but it was a way of saying we should reject an attitude and an approach that will perpetuate this cycle of violence. And that is the challenge that we face right now. How do we break this cycle of violence? You heard Dr. Gale and Dr. Walcott saying to us, it's a 40-year thing we've been going on with, and it has been created in so many and various different ways. How do we break the cycle? How do we break this, in the words of your theme, how do we break this generational curse? So I want to interrogate that principle as well, because in this Judeo-Christian society, a lot of talk is often presented that persons are inflicted or afflicted by this thing called a generational curse, that because you're born into a kind of a context, you're almost powerless to change, that you almost automatically have, as if there's some puppet master out there forcing one to perpetuate a kind of an action. And here again, the Bible is cited as presenting the fact that persons are indeed afflicted by this malady called a generational curse. But when you read the Bible carefully, you will notice that even within the Old Testament, there was a rejection of this kind of a perspective. If you'll allow me, and sorry to be quoting so much Bible to you this evening, but if you'll allow me, and when you have some time, you look at a conversation in Ezekiel chapter 18, taking place between God and the people. And the people quoted a proverb, and the proverb is that the parents eat sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. And they are presenting it to say, hey, God, this is why we are like this. This is why we find ourselves in exile, living in Babylon, find ourselves deprived of homeland, of king, robbed of dignity, no self-government. It is because our parents have sinned. And the response, the divine response is, no, that's not what it is. You have heard it said. That may have been a popular statement and a popular saying. But as of now, I am telling you that each person will have to take responsibility for their own situation. In other words, and then there's a story told of 3 generations, one good, one bad, and then the third one was good, and said the person is not afflicted by the circumstances of their birth, but that there is this gift that God has given called choice, given at creation, given to human beings that continues to operate in and through our lives. And so there ought to be an acceptance and an acknowledgement that though whatever our circumstances, whatever our antecedent may have been, we have this choice to depart from it. That is not to say, though, that there isn't this continuation within families and generation, as I'm sure you sociologists will tell. That is not to deny that, but it is just to make the point that that may be more nurture than nature. It is part of the structural violence that Dr. Walcott spoke about, the cultural reality that we have all created together that is creating and perpetuating this. So the reason I've taken this approach is to accept the point made earlier, I think by Dr. Walcott, that all of us have a part to play in this situation. We have all contributed to it, and it is for the church to accept, and people of faith and people who subscribe to faith to accept that we have and are contributing to it, and therefore we have a responsibility, and we ought to have this commitment to see what we can do, no, not just to see what we can do, almost a mandate to ensure that we can change and we can transform things. In the research cited earlier about people being in prison, incarcerated people, and the schools that they come from, a similar research was done on death row, and part of the evidence that came out was that there was hardly anyone who had any long commitment to church that found themselves incarcerated and on death row. That's why I talk about this ambiguity with the church and violence. On one hand, there is we are almost operating, legitimizing certain kinds of violence within the culture. But on the other hand, the church has been an important source, socializing people away from violence. And one of the errors we have made in our whole education system, and I'm grateful to Dr. Gale for the wonderful description of the Jamaican education process and the part and the role that the church played in contributing to education in a positive way and sometimes in a negative contribution, not deliberately, but caught up within a particular culture. One thing you learn as historians is that you really can't analyze and assess a person outside of the reality of their own culture and their own situation. Really can't. So part of what the church has to do and will continue to do, and part of what this ambiguity is that on one hand, there is this attitude, this theological perspective that is almost accepting of certain forms of violence. But on the other hand, there is this positive socializing, teaching and training of persons, and in particular the young, that would lead persons away from that. And I'm positing that a part of the problem that we now face and that we are now reaping is, as a country, we stop teaching civics, whatever you want to call it. You can change the name, stop teaching civics in our schools. And now they have also thrown out religious education. There was a time when religious education, not so much as teaching doctrines, but teaching moral precepts is what we learned in school as well. We learn that in school as well. That is now been taken out. Religious education is no longer a significant part of any of the curriculum of the theological colleges, the teachers' colleges. I think the last one who had it on their curriculum, they have now removed it. It could have been Shortwood Teachers College. They have now removed it. So that is now gone. So you have taken out civics. You have taken out religious education. Or those are two important ways and agents that are used to inculcate values and attitude. And then we wonder, what's happening to us? How did we get to this place? And how do we overcome this situation? So let me close by just saying that this is not a situation for any one sector. All of us are involved and all of us have contributed to the problem. So in my field, we'd say we all pray for forgiveness and ask God to help us as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Reverend Dr. Leila. As usual, quite to the point, raising some important questions. First of all, I want to thank you for putting some of us straight, especially those of us who are so steeped in warped hermeneutics. I mean, this is a really very important intervention, Dr. Leila, in terms of looking at the biblical and theological frame of violence and our response to violence. A part of the cultural violence that we face, you say, is that we're in a space where violence, torture, pain are normalized, and I'm so happy that you have been able to make that bold statement. I mean, when I heard it, I'm like, what? Because in our society, we don't question certain kinds of statements, and we don't raise questions about the church's role in normalizing violence. So I'm really happy that you have been able to put that on the table. Corporal punishment and what you've called it, the ambiguous nexus between the church and violence, and the historical antecedents of the colonial project. I mean, very, very important for us to recognize that, as you said, violence cannot be overcome by violence. It must be intercepted at the source, and all of us, including the church, must accept that we have a role, we have a responsibility, we can make a difference, we can interface in the ways we go about bringing positive change, in the way we go about transforming our young people and the wider society. So I want to thank you. I also want to thank you for providing me with a nice little segue in your Mahatma Gandhi's reference, because this takes us neatly to our next presenter, Dr. Ganesh Shetty, who is Indian. So there is that. I mean, when you did that for me, Dr. Leila, I was just, oh, cool. I have a nice segue here. And it's interesting because the next presentation is, as I said, from Dr. Ganesh Shetty, and his topic is "Can't Build No Foundation Pana If and a But: Identification and Management of Challenges Impacting the Jamaican Youth." Dr. Shetty is a consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist employed by the Kingston and St. Andrew Health Department, Southeast Regional Health Authority for the Ministry of Health and Wellness, Jamaica. Currently, he supervises the clinicians working at the child guidance clinics at the Comprehensive Health Center and Glen Vincent Health Center. He has worked at various child guidance clinics in the region, schools and community, as well as schools and communities for over 25 years. After the security operations in West Kingston in 2010, which is fresh in some of us' mind, still fresh, Dr. Shetty with his colleagues have helped over 250 children of those affected communities with post-traumatic stress disorder. Also, in collaboration with non-governmental organizations, Dr. Shetty and his team has trained and supervised the delivery of trauma treatment by youth workers in inner city communities of West Kingston, and has trained teachers at elementary schools to assist traumatized children and parents. He has also played a significant role in the starting of Saturday Clinic for Sexually Abused Children of Children's Home at the Comprehensive Health Center. After school closure in Jamaica to contain the spread of COVID-19, Dr. Shetty initiated and funded the Child and Adolescent Telemental Health Project in Kingston and St. Andrew child guidance clinics to reach affected youth and prevent their unnecessary exposure to coronavirus. He also played a crucial role in collaboration with the Ministry of Health and Wellness, Ministry of Education, with support from UNICEF to sustain this, and expanded the child and adolescent telemental health services to all child guidance clinics in Jamaica. How I know he's from India, he has an MBBS from the JN Medical College in India. And after that, I will say he's a totally West Indian man, a Caribbean man, He has a DM in psychiatry from UWI. He has a master's in public health as well from UWI, and of course, a clinical fellowship in child and youth psychiatry. Please help us welcome Dr. Shetty.
Thank you very much, Dr. Prendergast, for the kind introduction. I want to showcase the plight of our young people. No child is born a gunman. And this video from a young person shows how an innocent child turns into a ruthless gunman. Can I ask the technical folks to play that video for me?
Attention, everyone. Please hear me out carefully, or else you may pay dearly and regret dreadfully. This is neither a fiction nor an attempt to monsterize anyone. Who am I? I'm the one who may arrive as a result of unplanned or unwanted pregnancy, disowned by the heartless father, abandoned by the worthless mother, fated to face endless atrocities. I am the barrel baby who is forced to bounce around in the care of unclear relatives. I get exposed to age-inappropriate TV and violent movies. Yet, if I ever get tempted to emulate, the devil is beaten out of me. I am one of 6,000 children working and living on the streets. And I am also one of many underage girls working or dancing in the nightclubs. I am teased as AIDS bit me because my parents were killed by HIV. When I can't take it anymore and I act out, I am labeled as uncontrolled and I locked up in a so-called children's home or correctional facility. I am just a neglected and abused child, forgotten and forsaken. They call me lazy crazy at home and pretty dunce at school. I can barely read and write properly. Very weak in basic maths and history. Ashamed, I skip class to join my buddies under the mango tree and smoke some weed and Woolamedi. I am just a child with untreated ADHD or learning disorder. I often witness violence at home, school, and the community. I am afraid even to take the bus or taxi, fearful of parents and teachers who love to punish us physically, suspicious of people from certain class and community. When I buy my clothes, I wonder which color shirt should I buy. What if people see my color shirt and associate me with certain party affiliation and attack me? Sometimes I get caught in crossfires or even get murdered in a fake encounter. Horror grips my attention firmly as flashbacks haunt my memory. I am just a brutalized youth with PTSD, reliving the trauma daily. Sometimes I get recruited by the drug lords and the Iradan and graduate from just a school youth carrying guns in my school bags to a little gunman, fully trained to rape and kill mercilessly. I am just an unfortunate, emotionally dead youth unleashed on this wretched society.
Tragic. How this child turned into a ruthless gunman. Where is the village which is supposed to raise him? Was he unwanted child? Was he caught up in whether I'm white enough or black enough? Was he getting dual messages? Did he have some not so good role models to follow? Was he abused, neglected, abandoned? Did he have to work on the street because he was very poor? And Mahatma Gandhi said, worst kind of structural violence is of poverty. Did he have to be at a children's home, or was he locked up in a correctional facility when he broke some minor law? Did he have any mental retardation as autism? Was he having problems sitting in one place and focusing one thing and had ADHD? or having a learning disorder, which would make him very difficult to learn? And did he use ganja to drown the shame and bad feeling when he's trying to understand alphabets and they're talking about algebra? Did he become psychotic because of that? Was he bipolar, depressed, or manic? Did he see a lot of violence at home, in the community? And did he suffer post-traumatic stress, re-experiencing, having nightmares, avoiding people, and eventually getting numb of all feelings and having a foreshortened future where he does not see himself living like us, having a job, having a family? Did he got caught in the crossfire? Was he recruited by dawn and became emotionally dead, unleashed on this wretched society? Was he asking during all these years of torture and being lost that somebody, anybody, help? What turns a gunman, what turns an innocent child into a gunman or a killer? Sure, it takes a village to raise a child, but is it a situation, a child that is not embraced by the village is burning down the whole village just to feel its warmth? Something to think about. And what happened to the village? Did money mash it up, which commodifies everything, including relationship? Did education system cloud it up, which tells you only as good as your grades and your future is only as bright as your grades? We live in a very divisive monetary, military machinery system. Did you live in a community where militants rule what someone calls, not Jamaica, part of Jamaica, ruled by Dons, Donica? Did he got caught up with vanity and wreck up his values? Did religion also divide him with guilt and fear? Did the social system stink it up? Media muddled it up. No matter what has destroyed this village which raised the child, how can we build it back and embrace every child? And to start off, we must break all barriers. We must come out of the silos of our departments, of our agencies, of our ministries, and even go across the schools and churches and see how we can curb this scourge of crime and violence. How can we? How can we build that village back which can embrace these children? For that, we need to stop the parenting which causes torture and turns into the emotionless robots. We should see how we can support them and protect them from the scourge of poverty. We need to stop violence exposure at home, school, and communities, and also the legacy of plenty baby mothers and many baby fathers without anybody to really care for them. And we have to protect them from the virtual world and all the predators who will delude them, distract them, turn them into demented, confused, and depressed young people. And of course, early childhood experiences matter, and the adverse experiences shatter your mental health and your emotional life and future. So when we look at the factors which fuel these problems in the society, poor standard, poor parenting skills, poor psychosocial support, adverse childhood experience and trauma, and unidentified, untreated mental disorders. Look at any problem you can think of listed here. There is some contribution of these factors, maybe recently or way long ago. predisposing, precipitating, and perpetuating factors. And they will increase your chance of catching and having worse outcomes with physical illnesses like diabetes, heart, and cancer. And of course, COVID has made it only worse. So what is it? Is it a doomsday prophecy? Or should we have audacity and be willing to believe that even now, a dramatic change is still possible? And these four factors I mentioned are actually represented in the National Prevention Action Against Children Violence. And there is an inter-ministerial school strategy underway, which involves mainly, but other ministries also involved peripherally, Minister of Education, Minister of Health and Wellness, and Minister of National Security. And different ministries through their agency are contributing in different ways, but also have their own special contribution to the process of rebuilding this village. And for that, we have to cut across different ministries, agencies, as well as be open to get help from any other agency or NGOs and FBOs and so on. And even the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development, through its Social Development Commission, has a role, and so does Ministry of Labor and Social Security with this PATH program, early stimulation program, have a big role to play. And after Patterson's report, there's a trend which is transforming education for national development, which is looking at all these pillars of change. And National Parenting Support Commission is engaged in encouraging preventative parenting, which should build a strong parent-child relationship, have clear expectations, teach problem solving, improve communication, and basically help in child development and make them grow into problem solvers, not problem creators, and are mentally sound. And there's some key examples which are listed here. And also Minister of Education, in collaboration with Minister of Health and Wellness, has a school mental health curriculum where the folks in the school and also other important folks for students there are trained to recognize mental health issues in children and refer them. Not only that, but also support them in the school system. And we also have school-wide positive behavior intervention and support, which looks at 3 levels of problems in school. One is general normal level of problems, which can be addressed by school ethos and principles and values. That's tier 3. And then the 20% of students, maybe more in some schools, maybe way more in some schools, who have a problem. And some of them in tier 2 can be solved at the school level, and at tier 1 need a professional intervention from a psychologist or a psychiatrist or family therapist and social worker. And what is also very exciting is the development of integrated service delivery handbook, where different members from different agencies across ministry are going to come together and find the children who are having problems and choose the service providers and refer them, as well as monitor how they get help and how much that help is working or not. And this is some of the plans they have going forward, which is quite exciting, which is quite in the way of building the village back. And there's an elaborate screening process in this booklet and different guidelines as to where the screening takes place, what are the treatment plans, how cases managed, as well as monitored for its progress. And even Minister of Justice has child diversion program where minor crimes, children are not sent to jail for minor crimes, but are mentored, trained, educated, and rehabilitated, as well as counseled. And Minister of Health and Wellness, apart from having a generic problem-solving approach with minor mental health issues, as well as way of recognizing and referring in the community itself with problem management plus intervention. And we have introduction of wellness bench, which represents a safe place symbolically, where students with problems can go and sit and reflect and seek help. And also we have a lot of helplines, which are not just telephones, but also WhatsApp numbers and so on, as well as we have lines where child abuse can be directly reported, like 211. And when it comes to the third foundational contributor factor of ACEs and trauma, we have bounce back. I'm going to mention a little more about it, as well as, well, untreated and unidentified mental disorders, which has to be dealt with at the school and the community level. And these are the common interventions for trauma, and we have been offering it in an individual setting in the clinics for years. And this trauma-focused CBT has a robust evidence base and is best suited for clinic setting if the patients are patient and parents are patient to do the 12 to 20 sessions and a supportive family setting, which is absent in many of the children who are violated and eventually become violent. And for that, we tried cognitive behavior intervention for trauma in schools in West Kingston. It's a 10-group session intervention delivered in school by mental health clinicians, and it also has a robust evidence, best suited for school, but we need supportive educators and also we need clinicians who could go and train these educators. And we have support for students exposed to trauma, which is delivered by trained educator and guidance counselors themselves. It's also 10-session group intervention. It has good amount of evidence, and also we have some data to support it in our setting. This is a paper we presented in 2015, and there's a version of it called Bounce Back Together, where we're going to use the first 6 sessions of the trauma-focused intervention, where we just focused on to educating the students about what trauma does to them and how they can help themselves. And what we did is we trained all these teachers in the school with this intervention. The once a week, 2 hours sessions for the teachers, where they learn about these aspects of trauma, what it does to you, and what you can do to help yourself with deep breathing, muscle relaxation, visualization, and thought checking and such. And they were asked, and they did use this at different points in their everyday classroom to impart this information and the skills of deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, thought checking, thought stopping, and such in the classroom setting as everyday practice. And we had some data to show that it is also helpful. And we tried to train some young people in the community to impart the same information and skill training to the kids in their community. Although nearly 40% of young people showed improvement, there was minor improvement in others, as well as 1/3 of them showed decline. And this probably is because they were going back to the same family where same kind of legacy continues, and there might be an ongoing traumatization which could have affected the response. So the generic version of trauma-focused CBT can be piloted, it can be implemented in school, in the community setting, in the church also. There's one study where a counselor took it to her church and trained the Bible school teachers to use the information, use the skills to impart it to the students of Sunday school. And I have given the manual which comes with it to families who have traumatized child. For example, a couple of kids who are traumatized in the recent earthquake, and the family would go through the manual with the child and practice deep breathing, muscle relaxation twice daily, and reported significant improvement. So it has been tried and found helpful in family setting, school setting, guidance and counseling office, church setting. It can also be extended to juvenile detention center, workplace, as well as in a clinic, because deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, and visualization can all be but helpful. There's no copyright and there's no cost involved. And these are some of the actions which are involved in the intervention. As you can see, basic but very effective. So in summary, Bounce Back Together is you teach the teachers to use the intervention in the classroom setting on a daily basis, as appropriate, as convenient. And Bounce Back One is when the same intervention is offered to students who have different history of trauma, and that takes place in guidance and counseling offices. And then Bounce Back Two is where they go into more serious stuff like talking about their trauma and how they process the triggers in this office, in the counseling room. And also we include parents at some point to share their story as well as support the student or child. And that is necessary that we need to train the clinicians in this Bounce Back too. And some guidance counselor with appropriate qualification can also be trained in this. And we use a cascade model of training. So we train the teachers train the students, and we try the problem-based learning in that they'll come for a session on a Friday and use the intervention next 4 days next week and come the next Friday for session 2, information, giving us feedback, what worked, what did not work, and they are supposed to use what they learned so they don't lose what they did not use. And it can be implemented in different settings. And in interest of time, I'm going to rush a little bit. It can be used to help all students through the teachers, and guidance counselors will focus on those who have clear-cut history of trauma. It can be used in church and community, as well as in juvenile detention center. And Bounce Back 2 is more clinical, and once we have appropriate training, preferred is a master's level of degree in a counseling field, but also I was told by the creator of this intervention that in an emergency situation, we could also look at their previous learning experience and waive some of those requirements, but have to be supervised and supported. And some of the children will not respond adequately, and they might have complex trauma, more severe trauma, and they will be engaged in what we call extended bounce back, which will be another 6 to 8 sessions. And this is typically provided at the child guidance clinics. And some children have multiple problems and severe problems, like some of the children we're talking about who turn into violent persons and engage in illegal activity, crime, and violence. And for those children who are headed in that direction, we need a long-term, multimodal, multisystemic therapy, which is Jamaicanized as well as includes strong elements of trauma in it. And it needs a team of trained clinicians who can be derived from child guidance clinic, as well as service providers from the integrated service delivery model from Ministry of Education, as well as to do the family work, like functional family therapy kind of work with the families, where we look at all the needs of the family and put them in touch with appropriate resources and training. We could use case managers from Ministry of National Security, Citizens Security Program, and also we can interact and support the folks at Child Diversion Program from Ministry of Justice. So basically, it has to be interministerial, across agency, across ministries. So what we do with the unidentified and untreated mental disorders, there are a lot of them, and a lot of children suffer because they're not identified and treated. Approximately there are at least 110,000 children and adolescents in Jamaica who have diagnosable mental disorders, and 5%, that's 40,000, may have a severe mental disorders. And same 40,000 may even meet full criteria for post-traumatic stress disorders, and others suffering from varying degrees of post-traumatic stress. And in one study, 1 out of 5 adolescents were either a victim or perpetrator of violence. That's a staggering number, 1 out of 5. And in another study, more than 30% of inner city primary school kids had PTSD symptoms. So with the limited number of resources we have in terms of providing the mental health services, we have to probably start with the weakest of the link in the chain, that is children who are coming from dysfunctional poor families in the level 4 schools, as Professor Gale mentioned, and who are likely to be shot or become shotters. And how we can do that? We can create interventions at all levels of the school-wise positive behavior intervention support tier, where we can use Dream of World program, which is created and advanced by Professor Hickling and Dr. Jeffrey Walcott, as well as other levels can be provided bounce back, as well as extended bounce back, as the case may be. And training of different cadre of staff members and clinicians need to take place to take up this mammoth task. So the approach for these children cannot be sitting in the clinic and waiting for them to turn up, because most of the times they turn up for 1 or 2 times, especially when they're forced to come to us by the school and so on, and they disappear. The way to find them and help them is to go to school and communities where they live. And anyone who is interested in creating this village is invited to use Bounce Back Together, which is a basic intervention which can help the family, the church, and community to know what trauma does to you and others around you and what you can do to help yourself. So it needs some kind of audacity and willingness to believe that even now we can make significant change and significant difference in the life of these kids who are stuck in this cycle of abuse, neglect, and violence. And this is something I'll jump over. This is the possible way we can reach in as many places as we can. And of course, trainers should be chosen, and they need to be involved and committed to train, as well as there should be oversight, monitoring, evaluation, and learning as we go along. And it's not a silver bullet. It's not solve all the other problem. Definitely anthropological security has to be taken into account when we are delivering these interventions. And we have to rise above what are holding us back, because we know these things from a long time, why we're not doing it. First thing which pops up is budgetary restraints. But do we know that we spend more money in sewing up these young people, or the young people who have been hurt by these young people, in these hospitals and clinics? The medical expense and secondary expense is about, I was told, $5 billion per year. And that can be spent in employing a lot of clinicians and professionals and paraprofessionals to do the job. And we jump up when something bad happens and everybody talks about it for 9 days, but then our enthusiasm wanes. We need to keep the flame burning. Cannot be burnt out. We have to continue to burn and burning. And we have job descriptions and we have workload, but unless we think out of the box and do something unconventional but effective, the problems will persist. We are good in talking, but when it comes to task shifting and task sharing, we shy away. Some folks are there because they love to do something for these young people, and others maybe not. And we need to be mindful of that. There's no competition. There's enough work for everybody, and just we have to find innovative ways to compensate folks for their work. And there's no competition. There can be there's no one pie we have to fight over. We can create more pies, and everybody get a pie piece. And we are great in talking about common goals. We have to do something about the scourge of violence and so on. But sometimes hidden agendas come in the way. And we have to unhidden them so that we are transparent, and they know why Dr. Shetty is trying to come out of clinic, because he's tired of sitting in the clinic and seeing these kids coming 2 times and disappearing. And we want folks in the school to help us to help them in the school, and we want folks in the community to help them in the community, so that what we do together is of some consequence. So we'll not be wasting our time, and they will not be wasting their time on bus fare. And we have to have it covered in our operational framework, and we should have policy and program to support it. Definitely it's time to give up the chronic contemplation and do something, or else this is what will happen. Everybody will blame somebody because nobody did what anybody could have. So everybody must do something. And it's right there, last 4 alphabets in the word Jamaican. I can, we can, but united we can. We just have to shut the red eyes and transfer bad minds. There's no problem our creativity and ingenuity cannot overcome. Thank you. Let us join hands and do whatever we can safely and effectively to help each other and to help prevent Jamaica, our beautiful land of wood and water, from becoming a place of suicide, blood, and slaughter. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Very thoughtful, very poetic as well. Thanks, Dr. Shetty. I mean, you're calling for a certain audacity in addressing the issues. No child is born a gunman, and we know that we're not just a bunch of nobodies around there, or anybody for that matter. We are a group of people who are determined to take action, determined to answer that question: what has happened to the village that is supposed to raise our children? How do we evolve from Don Mecca to that such beautiful way of expressing the Jama I can in Jamaican? And I note that again, we're going to be having a conversation at the back end of these presentations. But as I say, I mean, rebuilding is a process that all of us will have to embrace. Not only our own responsibility, but start by embracing every child, and all parts of our society will have to be involved in the schools, in the media. You mentioned of something that is really at top of front of people's mind, what's happening in the virtual world, the churches, what's happening in our homes. And of course, you talk about, the importance of having these multi-ministerial approaches, cross-ministerial approaches, interministerial approaches, all the ministries of government that have some kind of responsibility for health, for education, for safety, for security, for justice. I mean, the truth is that anywhere we have to deal with issues around the sustainability of safe and healthy communities. That's where we must all gather and collaborate. You have said it well as far as I'm concerned. I mean, there is the notion that a dramatic change is still possible is also something that jumped out for me. And you have presented some examples. As this is about providing solutions and exploring solutions as well. And you've provided some real good examples of how the work is making an impact. The cognitive behavioral interventions for trauma in schools, they helping students to cope with trauma through the training of the teachers and getting them involved there. And of course, the school and community-based initiatives all around. And I really like the sharing on the Bounce Back Jamaica program, the different versions of it. We need to really get together and work together to make the children know that somebody does care. I think that's very important. And again, I'm looking for the segue. So thank you very much, Dr. Shetty, for that enlightening presentation. The bottom line is there is hope. We're exploring the challenges and we're presenting some solutions, and there is hope, which is actually the title of our next presentation. There is hope. Strategies for building resilient children with Miss Georgia Rose. Again, another of my good friends. Georgia is actively involved in mental health education and early childhood development. She holds a Master of Science degree in Clinical Psychology and a Master of Arts degree in Infant and Early Childhood Development, and is currently completing a Doctor of Philosophy in Infant and Early Childhood Development. Georgia has been actively engaged as a clinician within the Western region for approximately 20 years. And I love to say she is a lecturer at the undergraduate level at the University of the West Indies, Mona Western Jamaica campus in the beautiful city of Montego Bay. She has contributed to numerous local print media articles and is an accomplished public speaker. In 2015, Georgia was recognized by the Special Education Unit of the Ministry of Education and Youth for unrelenting and untiring service to special education. She is actively engaged in community service. Georgia is a past chairman for the St. James Red Cross and has conducted numerous psychosocial support trainings across the Caribbean on behalf of the International Federation of the Red Cross Disaster Mental Health Unit, especially with a focus on the impact of trauma on children and adolescents. And one thing I know about Georgia is that she is deeply passionate about the promotion of mental health and wellness. Please welcome Miss Georgia Rose.
Thank you so very much for that welcome, Dr. Prendergast. Isn't it lovely to be the final speaker after such a long evening, such an ambitious task, I think, and to be the only female on the platform. So I feel very wonderful, and I'm going to try to do it justice. I promise not to be too long-winded and just to jump right into it. Let's see. Okay. So I am going to be speaking to us this evening, wait a moment, about building resilience in children. And our previous speakers, I think, have set a wonderful framework to help us to understand what are some of the challenges and where those challenges may have originated from that we are now experiencing in our children and our adolescents. And I hope to take the conversation in another direction as we talk about how do we fortify our children in such a way that they are able to withstand the trauma associated with the negative experiences that they may be exposed to in life. So the first thing we want to start off with is a sound definition of resilience. What is resilience? It's a term that we throw around a lot. We hear a lot about our children being resilient, and then we have people say who they're not resilient. They're stunned, they're numb, they're traumatized, they are not coping well. And the pendulum can swing in any direction. I don't think that there is a firm position on that because we have not done any scientific empirical studies to really look at the level and the degree of resilience amongst our Jamaican children. But I dare say it goes beyond Jamaica and it becomes a global phenomenon. As we speak about resilience, what it is and how we build it and how do we promote and safeguard it. So resilience is the psychological ability to cope mentally and emotionally with a crisis. Dr. Gill spoke about exposure to trauma, to toxic stress, all of those things. And I want to go a little bit further and say resilience really speaks to being able to use Dr. Shetty's term to bounce back to your earlier position of functioning. So whenever you go through a crisis or a traumatic event, are you able to move through that traumatic event and return to your original space of functioning, or even better? Let's see. So all children experience stressors. And I know within the Jamaican context, we often laugh about it or take it at a very surface level when we say, you know, what stress should our children really be experiencing? They don't pay bills. You know, that's a common statement that we often hear. But I'm here to remind us, because I think at the root of it, most of us understand that if you're a living being, you experience stress. It is not something that can be avoided. But what the research and the literature has told us is that continuous exposure to stressors. So I want us to make sure that we're aware of this distinction. It is not just exposure to stress and trauma, but continuous exposure to stress and trauma, or marked stressors or marked trauma, may put children at long-term risk for mental health disorders, behavioral and emotional dysregulation, speech and language delays, and learning disorders. There is an increasing robust drive to look at the long-term effects on stress on children. And what the science is telling us is that stress has the capacity to transform and modify the architecture and the neuronal structure and the neuronal communication that occurs within the nervous system. And if we accept that to be a truth, then we as the clinician, the stakeholders, the parents and guardians, the teachers, the educators, the community leaders have an appreciation and understanding that we have to help our children to better cope with their stress. And I'll speak a little bit more about that. Dr. Gale, Dr. Walcott, and Dr. Shetty would have spoken about adverse childhood experiences, ACEs for short. And adverse childhood experiences really came out of this large-scale longitudinal study that was conducted that looked at what were the long-term effects of having been exposed to significant trauma and stresses before the age of 17 years. And what we have found is that the more adverse childhood experiences that an individual was exposed to or was victim to, the more likely or the more at risk that individual was for long-term deleterious mental health effects. So you put you at risk for the development of a mental illness. It puts you at risk for not doing well and excelling in school. It puts you at risk for early self-harm behaviors and deviant activities like early criminality. So we recognize that the stressor is not just an experience that evaporates once it passes, but it has traces that lingers within the individual and has the capacity to influence how they move through life. Science tells us that some children develop the ability to overcome serious hardships while others do not. And this causes us to scratch our heads a little bit. Why is it that some children can go through marked challenges, marked hardships, and still rise like the phoenix, if we want to use that term, whereas some children just have to be exposed to a little stress and seem to struggle to bounce back from that experience? There's a lot of data that's out there, a lot of research that's seeking to answer that question, and we want to get into some of it. So we want you to understand the 4 points of resilience, and I'm going to explain them as we go along. 1, we are not born with resilience. However, the argument does not stop there. While we are not born with the capacity to be resilient, we do have genetic factors and social markers that influence how we will respond to stressors. And you might be saying, what do you mean by that? Some children are born into spaces that put them at risk for fractured mental health capacities. So if you're born in a home where poverty exists, and we're talking about marked poverty, where crime and violence is the order of the day, that abuse is a norm, where there's parental absenteeism and abuse and violence and hardship, then you are more likely to struggle to bounce back from any additional stressor that you might encounter as a child or as an adolescent. So therefore, even though children are not born resilient, or your marker for resilience is not stamped into you at birth, you may be at a disadvantage as it relates to your capacity to move through stressors given your social situation and the family of origin that you are born into. 2, resilience is built and compromised. So in the same vein that we build up resilience in children, we also compromise resilience in children based on their engagement with their environment. One of the things that I love about working with children is that they don't get to have a say in what's going on in their life, and they definitely therefore need to have advocates. As adults, we get to make choices about what happens to us on a daily basis, what roads and paths we take, what decisions we make. Our children are not so fortunate. They don't have that power as yet. They rely on the adults within their spaces to decide what their life is going to look like, feel like, and be like in this moment in time until they get to a place and a state of true independence. So while children interact and engage with their environment, their resilience is being built or it's being torn down. Resilience is impacted by both risk and protective factors. And what a lot of research and data that is coming out, especially from the Harvard Center for the Developing Child and the Yale Child Center studies, is that many children, regardless of the deleterious experiences that they may experience over the course of their childhood lifespan, are still blessed and fortunate to meet adults who try to build them up. And we're going to get into the role of those adults a little bit later in the presentation. So we recognize that while children might be exposed to risk factors, more often than not, they are also exposed to protective factors. Resilience, the final point, is necessary to achieve mental health and wellness. So you might think about, why are we so invested in the state of resilience of our children? Because if our children are not able to withstand the effects of stress, which is an everyday occurrence of life and being a part of the human race and being a living being, then they already have been positioned to struggle. So resilience is a necessary part of future success. I want to tell you a little story. So I want you to journey with me for a little bit. There was a study that was conducted. It's called the Biosphere 2 Project. And the Biosphere Project sought to study Earth's living systems while managing any confounding variable and external stressors. And what they did, forgive me for my typo, what they did was that they planted these trees in these safe spaces. The trees, the plants, they were planted in these domes, and the domes were a very controlled environment. The wind was controlled, the temperature was controlled. It was free of pests and any type of hazards. And of course, these trees grew rapidly. The leaves were beautiful. The foliage was remarkable. They were vibrant. The trees appeared to be more lush and more vibrant than the trees that were outside the dome and were not privileged to have all these protective factors and mechanisms in place. But guess what? The scientists arrived at Biosphere 2 one day, shocked out of their wits, to find that the trees had toppled over before achieving full maturation in comparison to the trees that were not protected and safeguarded inside of the dome. Upon closer inspection, what the scientists found was that the bark, the roots, the trunks of the tree were very fragile. They had not benefited from sun exposure. There had not been enough shedding and pruning that naturally occurs as a result of wind speed, pests, other natural organisms that come and feed off of the trees. So the trees, even though they were cocooned and sheltered and not exposed to any stress, they didn't survive. In fact, the lack of exposure to stress made the trees weaker. The study demonstrated that while they were protected in every possible way, they did not flourish. And what we learned, the lesson that was taken away from this study, that had nothing to do with psychology, nothing to do with development, it became a side lesson, but a major lesson is that stress is an important factor in building resilience. The absence of stresses do not make our children strong. Stress is a necessary component of life. It builds character and teaches resilience. Our children learn survival skills through hardships. And this is sometimes a very difficult point for parents and guardians and those of us who are advocates for child health and wellness to swallow, because we want to go out like soldiers championing the rights of our children, and we feel that we must always be defending and fighting for our kids. Yes, we want to keep our children in safe spaces and we want to protect them and defend them, but we also have to recognize that their journey through hardship builds character. The experience of stress helps to create protective layers, just like the trees in the Biosphere 2 project, that aid coping in later years. Our children learn that through the experience of stress, they can survive difficult experiences. And while they may be painful, they do not signal an end. The absence of stress does not speak to mental health and wellness. It is the capacity to move through stress that speaks to mental fortitude. The single most common factor for building resilience in children, based on all the studies that I read that have been captured, that have been done, is at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive parent, caregiver, or adult. Dr. Herbert Gale and Dr. Jeffrey Walcott spoke to this directly. The presence of at least one stable adult. It does not have to be a parent or a biological relative. It just needs to be one positive force that builds and pours into that child. What that one positive adult does is provide personalized responsiveness, provides a scaffold where children are able to fail and make mistakes in a safe space, help children to build adaptive skills that show them you can do it, help children to build key capacities such as building, planning, monitoring, and regulating behavior. The capacity to be able to do these things within a safe environment with a positive guide makes all the difference in children's lives. And if you have been privy, or if you've had the experience of reading about children who have gone through significant abuse, there is always a story of what we like to call an angel. I was so surprised in one of my articles as I was preparing for this presentation, where they spoke about angels who step into children's lives. And angel seems like a very simple term to use. It seems like, oh my gosh, such a corny line, but it is so fitting. In the same way that predators prey on children and destroy their sense of safety and peace and trust, angels step in and help to restore those things. So the research tells us all we need is one positive adult. How do we go about building resilience? For parents and guardians who are present, we want to give our children space to respond to manageable stresses. Teach our children not to avoid stress, but how to manage, how to problem solve on their own. We have gotten to a stage where so many of us have become more privileged than our own parents and our forefathers, that we now go in and we do everything for our children. We do not allow them to fail. We do not allow them to try on their own. We do not put them in a position to see what they're really made of. And we need to understand that we're not really helping our children. What we're doing is handicapping them. We're making them very fragile, like glass bowls, and we want to move beyond them. We want to teach our children to figure it out, advocate on their own. And that's something I like to tell my own children. You've been given a voice. Speak up and use your voice to see what is going on, how you're feeling, and what you would love to be different. It doesn't mean things will change. We also have to teach our children that life is not always fair. And when I say that, my children might say, Mommy, you're not helping the situation. But it is the reality that life is going to present them with hardships. There's no guarantee that life is supposed to be easy. How do we help our children to manage and to build resistance even more? One, manage the language. Teach and model for our children healthy language. Avoid terms like I am stressed, I can't bother, my life is over, this not working, me give up. We want to see stress as healthy. We want to see stress as normal and necessary. We want our children to understand that stress is an indicator that we're not comfortable with something. It is a warning signal. It is a part of our built-in survival evolutionary mechanisms. It is not a bad thing. It is not something that we have to run away from. Being unhappy with something does not mean that life comes to an end. Being unhappy means it's a call to action. We need to change things. We need to fix things, right? So we want to replace this with, I might find this situation stressful. Neuro-linguistic processing studies demonstrate that language influences neuronal activity. So positive speak manipulates our brain in positive ways. The words that we use to our children, the words that we use to express our emotions and ourselves, they affect how our brain relates to each other, the neuronal communication. So manage the language too. We still have a role to protect our children. While stress is vital, unnecessary stress and too much stress is dangerous. As parents and guardians, the protection of our children is critical. Mummies and daddies, grandparents, aunts and uncles, we want to remind us that our children need us. They need us to shield them. They need us to protect them. Be mindful of the spaces that we put our children in, that we send our children to, and the spaces that we allow other people to interact with our children in. We can't prevent every problem. And so many parents who find out that their children have been exposed to trauma and abuse wish they could go back in time and wipe it all away. We won't be able to do that all the time, but as much as we possibly can, safeguard our children's well-being. 3, prepare our children for survival. Support our children in difficult times. Allow them to share their experiences in a safe manner. Do not dismiss their feelings. Engage them in strategies to help them feel supported. How do I deal with the adult who makes me feel uncomfortable? How do I deal with the bully at school? How do I deal with the teacher whom I believe does not listen or may not like me? How do I deal with a situation that I find to feel very unfair? I read something that said, give our children things to brag about us. Let our children feel that they're a priority. They're very special to us. Let our children understand that despite the challenges and the mistakes they may make, we are always on their side. We're in their corner. Discipline and consequences do not mean that we don't love our children. And in fact, having our children ride out the storms of discipline and consequences help them to understand later in life that should they make a mistake, and there are consequences associated with it, they won't fall apart. They will live through it just as how they have lived through other things. The capabilities that underlie resilience can be strengthened at any age. So there is hope. It's not too late. And there is research to support this statement, right? So we can build resilience at any stage and at any age. It does not matter what the adverse experiences might have been. We can build and repair the fractures that do exist. How do we do that? Teach our children that it is okay to be bored. They do not need to be entertained at all times. It's okay if life seems simple and basic at times. Encourage and support healthy relationships. Our children need to have the capacity to build relationships outside of the home. Yes, mommies and daddies, even though our homes are safe spaces that we may have curated with the best interest of our family members in mind, our children also have to have the capacity and the freedom to have relationships outside of the home. And we want to support and cultivate healthy relationships that expand beyond the household. Engage our children in team activities, so the football and the netball and the cricket and the swimming and the joining of a band and the being a part of a club. Uniformed activities help to build confidence and self-esteem and self-identity. Support a skill. Not all of our children will be academically gifted. Our children might excel in other ways, and having a sense of industry and purpose helps to build resilience. Encourage our children to practice balance. In nothing that they do must it be all or nothing. Balance is an integral part of stress management. Encourage your children to spend time alone, to be able to sit with self and to be comfortable and to be happy. Allow our children to experience consequences. Do not jump in. to fix every single situation. Actions have consequences, and consequences teach valuable lessons. Teach and practice forgiveness, or children will make mistakes. And you know what's so important is that if we don't extend grace to our children when they make a mistake, as they get older and others wrong them, they will not know how to extend grace or forgiveness. We have gotten to a place in society where we're very punitive, and everything is a position of finality. We don't allow our children to make mistakes, and therefore they walk away feeling as if they're flawed and they're corrupted and they are beyond salvation. And I want to challenge that as much as possible. Teach our children to live through their failures. Failure is a part of life. We will not win at everything, and we won't win in every moment. Failing in something does not mean that they are a failure. And failing in something doesn't mean that there are not other opportunities. So often our children feel very catastrophic whenever they don't win or they don't excel, because we have given this idea that only position in life is number one. And that's not true. There are many positions. Teach our children the stories of others. Help our children to understand that there is a larger world beyond them, that there are many people in life who have more than them, and there are many people in life that have less than them. And it is great to be satisfied in the space that you are. It's great to want more, but it's also great to be grateful. Help them to appreciate that there are many other people on this road and journey of life. And if they can make it, so too can you. And finally, we always want to remind everyone that there is no good health without good mental health, and we encourage everyone to continue on this journey as we build the mental health and wellness for children and adolescents. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Georgia. There is no wellness without mental health wellness. Thank you so very much. This is indeed a good way to bring a closure to the presentations in what is indeed a Child Month webinar, after all. I mean, we've looked at the history, the culture of violence. We've looked at varying frameworks, including community-based approaches, including the theological and religious responses, and we're looking at those. Then you are here sharing with us some direct ways in which we can help our children to build resilience. There is hope after all. The resilience is not just about bouncing back, but also the possibility of bouncing back better than before the impact. And of course, it's something that we talk about all the time. Culture is constructed, behavior is learned, resilience is cultured in an environment of empowerment to manage risks and protection factors. And I think it's very important for us to note that it's very difficult for a lot of us as parents to accept that growing healthy and vibrant and resilient children include them experiencing stress. And I know one of the questions that you're going to have to answer, Georgia, is how much stress is too much stress for our children. But what I want to do at this time is to kind of just open up. We did promise that we would allow a few questions at the back end in the interest of time. We had about 10 minutes. So what I'm going to do, I know that that Dr. Walcott had a question for Dr. Gale. I think Dr. Gale also wanted to expand on or probably he may have a question for Dr. Walcott. I know Dr. Shetty also placed a couple ideas on the table. I think we want to hear a little bit of an expansion from Dr. Shetty around the Build Back program, Bounce Back rather program, and of course Dr. Layla, raising some real serious questions about how the church can be engaged in this whole process of healing that needs to take place around the issues of violence. And Georgia, you have some questions there as well. So Where is my good friend Jeffrey? Because I think we wanted to start there, so we take it through the similar process where we look at the history all the way down to the whole business of raising resilient children. So Jeffrey, if you shoot Dr. Gale the question and just open up, and what we'll do is that we'll just take the one question, the responses, move to the next, so we can complete this within the time allotted.
I want to get to the exciting statistics that Herbert presented on the issue of the financial dependency of women and men issue, because you had stated that you did a generational analysis. I pulled up a paper that Fred Hicklin and I wrote in 2013 on the correlates of dependency, personality disorder. And we found similarly that financial dependency was 2-to-1, had a 2-to-1 ratio in women, despite the fact that more women are higher educated and more women hold middle management jobs. The question is, did you do an analysis actually across socioeconomic demographics as well to see if there was a difference between women in lower to upper to middle social income?
Yes. What we found was that when we pinned the 4 roles that men carry out as adults, which is to provide, protect, and all of those, that there's a shift on which of them is more important as depending on the employer level of the woman. So the more money a woman had is the less she would depend on money, and the more she would want him to nurture and to protect and so forth. But when you look at the bottom quintile women, they demanded more of men in terms of what proportion of provide and protect. And they did not require nurturing and being role model and any of the upper tier things that men can offer. It was about money and protect your house. And of course, you know what that means. If you're uneducated, unskilled, money and protection means a gun and illegal activities. So that's what we found.
So, I mean, I just taking questions and response in the interest of time. I think this group will need to get together and have a serious dialogue, right? Elizabeth, Dr. Crossman, you're going to have to organize for that to happen. But before I pose a question to Dr. Walcott, Dr. Gale, can you just a quick response? What are your thoughts on the proposed ban on corporal punishment in homes? Quick response.
Well, the issue for me is not so much the ban, because those things come in words. It just reminds me of what I'm just coming from downstairs and hearing the word gender neutral. Those things don't mean anything. Gender neutral can mean that anybody can go for prosa money, but less than 10 men have ever asked their wives for half the house. So we can talk all we want, we can say all the words and be very political and populist. But at the end of the day, 87% of neighbors know their neighbors' business very well in Jamaica. I was shocked when I saw the data. But literally only 6% will do anything about it. So there are some things that can't be legislated, and you can put them in place on paper, but in real life, just don't work that way. So that's my position in it. It's a good political tool, right? If election was coming, I would be waving it like a flag because it makes sense. But in real life, I'm going to assume about 6%, based on the data we're seeing, about 6% of impact will be realized. And 6% is extremely low. It just crossed the margin of error by 1%. It's not.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. We have a question for Dr. Walcott. Can transgenerational trauma be passed down genetically?
Oh,
So there are some interesting studies that have been coming out in the field of epigenetics, that shows that your DNA makeup actually changes with experiences, and then those experiences you then pass along hereditary to your children and your children's children. I think the most iconic experiment was actually the ones in the rat population, where they starved a generation of rats, and their offsprings developed diabetes, and 5 generations down they still had a higher prevalence of diabetes. So we do recognize now that it's not just genetic material is warped by mutations and by biological factors, but actually your experiences can help to change your genetic makeup that you can pass along and pass down in generation. And certain traits, phobias, fears, are linked, and we know that most mental disorders have some form of genetic linkages. So yes, in fact, there is a possibility that you can transmit it down the line.
Sorry, may I just add that the human species has to prepare the next generation, and it does so by meme or by physical and neurobiological reproduction. And therefore, anything at all you do now is going to be transferred. And that is why even when you study warrior genes, right, which is the monoamine oxidant type A variant L, right, or MAOA for those who can't bother with a long word. Even when you study those, you can see that generations that have spent 3 generations in a violent area, even if they came from a peaceful area, they are going to develop resistance to prepare for war. Don't take more than 3 generations. So your body always have to prepare you, control, and remember the brain is both limbic and cognitive. So and the limbic is far more powerful than the cognitive. We act more than we think. Sadly, I know people are scared of hearing that, right? But that has to be passed on, so we are prepared. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both. I have a question. Well, first of all, a comment from our participants. I mean, this is a wonderful collaboration and really very informative evening, educational. And so we want to thank the participants for joining. I want to tell you that we have we had reached our peak of 100 active viewers and more than 300 on the Ministry of Health and Wellness platform. Dr. Shetty or Miss Rose, anyone of you can take this question from one of our participants. How does a child deal with the bully at school?
The first thing I teach their child would be to use a 3-finger magic, not the middle finger. Is stop, think, and behave, right? And also ignore the ignorance, because the other child who probably is unhappy, frustrated in his own way, going through some trauma of his own, is trying to get some fun out of troubling this child, calling him names or so on. And other thing I tell him is, what's your name? And they usually tell him, I'm John Brown. Okay, are you sure about that name? Yes, doc. So that's the only name you're going to answer to. If they call you monkey, donkey, idiot, stupid, they're talking to somebody you don't see. And you know what they say about people who talk to somebody you don't see? And also, don't sit there and take abuse. Can you walk? Sure. Can you run? Sure. And if they corner you at some place, don't stand there and take abuse. Run to somebody who can support you, listen to you. That will be a teacher, a guidance counselor, vice principal, dean of discipline. Don't worry about they calling you coward. They're not talking to you next day, because they'll trouble you anyway, right? So there are some things, and we need to develop a culture of not bullying, be kind to people. And cyberbullying cuts across school. Bully in one school could inform his friend in another school to put something on Instagram about the child he doesn't want to flourish in his class. And even if we go to police, all they have to say is, you can sue that person. What are you going to sue a 10th grader who is putting some foolishness on the thing? So developing that culture, that ethos about no bullying, but be kind to each other would help. But the child himself has to learn some magic to not to be affected, and also have a bunch of folks who could stand for him, stand up with him, so that the bullies are mostly cowards. They find a supposed to be a vulnerable child and try to bother. That's why I used to be surrounded by a couple of my well-built friends in high school, so the bully had to take notice of it and back off.
Okay. Good
I want to
example there.
jump in, Dr. Prendergast,
Yes.
to remind our parents and guardians that, bullying is a serious threat to mental health and well-being of children. I don't believe it is something that can be left up to the child alone to deal with. We do have to, as the adults, we have to create those safe spaces where it is that we have to speak to our teachers and administrators, and we too often we tell our children, ignore it or go and sit down, and that really does not solve the problem. So there has to be active and intentional responses and programs in all our schools that help our children to manage bullying. And I know bullying has been around for the longest time, so beyond the teaching our children to stand up for themselves, we have to teach that, yes, whether or not we want to like that, but we also have to recognize that the adults in the spaces also have a responsibility to help our children appreciate what healthy interaction and exchange looks like, and to create no bullying spaces or zones, because bullies only thrive in spaces where no one is saying to them, this is not acceptable behavior. So we also have to take responsibility for that.
Can I just advise us to remember that 72% of bullies are more vulnerable than the people they bully? Those are hardcore data. People who are loved and are cared for and have all 4 bars of ontological security don't bully anybody. So I've always advised governments and schools and everybody who work in these areas with children that once you see a bully, when I taught in primary schools, anybody who bully anybody, I just pull them aside and start to work with them. And when I went to SOAS to study violence, it was written on the back of the chart, on a chart at the back of the class, that says solving one bully, right, or solving one violence perpetrator saves a lot of victims.
Yeah. All right. Amen. As we come to the end of this discussion section, as I say, limited for time and so on, I want to ask a question at the last question of Dr. Shetty, and then also give Dr. Leila an opportunity to just close us out with a comment. Dr. Shetty, can you share the details about the bounce back program for the churches? And then we'll have Dr. Leila give us his wrap-up comments for this evening, and we'll close out thereafter.
Sure. Bounce Back Together for churches is basically a 6-session training for the folks in the church, whether they are Sunday school teachers or even folks who would like to assist traumatized children in their church. Basically, it will inform their trainees, who will be the folks who want to help in the church, Sunday school teachers, and so will go through the 6-session training, which involves to teach them what trauma does to them and how they can help themselves, because many of us are traumatized too, as well as the children they come across in this church space, with deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, visualization, as well as the cognitive coping, thought stopping, thought changing, and so on. And I just put a generic version of it in the chat in the YouTube. So anybody, and also I put my email, so anybody who's interested could download that generic version to get an idea what it is, as well as they can contact me for further information and exploring the possibility of training, free of cost.
Yeah, thank you so very much for that. And as you mentioned, placing it in the chat in the YouTube, I just want everybody to know that the video will be available immediately after we close out on this exercise. So you'll be able to access that information as well. Right after this, the presentations will be made available on our YouTube platform. Dr. Leila, you actually have the privilege of closing out this comment section for me.
Right. Apart from expressing my gratitude for this webinar, I do appreciate the interdisciplinary nature of it. It reminds us that as human beings, we are whole people with many different dimensions that make up the whole people. And I think what the conversation has done for me this evening is just to see the areas of connection, the areas where we can support each other as we work towards the same goal of creating a wholesome society, one that is free from violence, one that is free from cruelty, one that is free from torture, and one where all people will just flourish. That's our aim.
Thank you so very much. You know, one of the beautiful things about having a panel like this is that I can just call on anyone to do the summary for me. But I really appreciate all of your contribution to this activity hosted by the Southeast Regional Health Authority, Mental Health Services, of course, in partnership with the Department of Sociology, Psychology, and Social Work at our University of West Indies, Mona, and by extension, the Western Jamaica campus in particular, and of course, the Jamaica Psychiatric Association. This is a very important Child's Month webinar. We try to do this on an annual basis, and the topic for this evening, violence and violation, generational curse or public health challenges. I hope you would have come to some kind of conclusion on the topic. One way or the other, we appreciate your being here. Somebody else will do the actual vote of thanks, but I personally want to just say, you know, how much I appreciate the commitment of our presenters as we fight one another. Psychosocial antecedents of violence, Dr. Herbert Gill. Impact of structural violence on mental health and well-being, Dr. Jeffrey Walcott. Violence and violation, the theological framework for understanding and responding, Reverend Dr. Glenroy Leila. Can build no foundation for an if and a but. Identification and management of challenges impacting the Jamaican youth, Dr. Ganesh Shetty. Can build no, sorry, I said that already, not true. There is hope after all. Strategies for building resilient children with Miss Georgia Rose. Thank you so much for engaging in this evening's activity. But to formally say thanks to the entire team, I'm going to invite Dr. Colleen Gooden, the parish psychiatrist in St. Catherine, to do the honors. Dr. Crossman, seems like you're going to have to drop in.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. My apologies for that.
No problem.
Yes. You know, because I'm multitasking, let me just say a big thank you. It has been quite a good evening. I didn't think that we would have lasted until 9:15, but I'm so happy for those who have stayed with us. We still have over 70 persons online, well, in the space that I'm at, and I am very grateful for the presenters. Because I don't know if we could have done it in such a beautiful way. And we have had some very interesting and intriguing topics, and I'm agreeing with you, Dr. Prendergast, that we really need to sit together, this team, and perhaps others too, to join, because somebody did ask in the chat about the silos that we have created, and that has prevented the good collaboration that we will need to look at the systems, the structures that are in place that are holding down, and you know, people say, you know, somebody tie me down and hold me down, they throw something upon me. How it is that we are going to be going against these systems that have really put our children and adolescents or people in the positions that we are right now. And I'm so glad for all the factors. We talk about the psychosocial, cultural, the spiritual factors that we have focused on this evening. So I'm really very grateful for Dr. Shetty, Dr. Layla, Reverend Dr. Layla, Dr. Herbert Gale, Dr. Walcott, Miss Georgia Rose, and of course, ably moderated by Dr. Prendergrass. We cannot forget about those who have worked tirelessly behind the scenes. So we thank Mr. Andre Hewitt, who is the information technologist from the University of the West Indies, Western Jamaica campus. And we have Dr. Tiffany Grant online from the Jamaica Psychiatric Association, who has also worked very hard in sending out the information and getting things going. We look forward to other persons, to other webinars like this. I think the conversation cannot just stop here. We have started something and we really need it to continue and to really see how best we can do things. Not to forget the man of God who led us into prayer, and such a beautiful prayer it was, Dr. Anthony Allen, and we really want to thank him. And I want to say all the best for us. Some of us will still have to travel home, so safe travels wherever you go. And we do hope that you will join us again in our other webinars that we will have and for the other conversations that we will continue. So thank you so much and have a good evening. Remembering as always, there's no good health without good mental health. Over to you, sir. Or we can say out.
Good night, everyone. My name is Patrick Prendergast.